Sid Kaganu is an ugly, low-life loner who walks around thinking he's Peter Parker from Spider-Man Homecoming. The only thing he shares with Peter is the loser phase, minus the charm. No girls, no attention, no real glow-up. Just a weird dude in the shadows acting like he's got a grand purpose while living off delusions and self-written monologues. He pretends to be average by day and edgy by night, but he's really just a lonely kid with no friends and a browser history full of OnlyFans subscriptions. No power, no presence, just fake confidence and a trash-tier secret life. At the beginning of the story, Akane Nishino, who thinks of herself as Ariana Grande, is getting ready for school. She's in the shower but clearly spaced out, lost in thoughts about her aura, which basically doesn't exist. She stepped out, dressed up, and headed for the gate, only to freeze when she saw a bunch of reporters waiting outside. But just like that, the moment vanished. It was only a dream, and in reality, it was just her driver waiting by the car. He looked at her, maybe sensing something was off, but she waved it off with a dry nothing, and off they went. Once she reached school, her fake smile clicked into place, and the hallway turned into her stage again. Everyone greeted her like she was some kind of celebrity, and she played along perfectly, replying like the perfect girl she always pretended to be. But the moment she spotted Sid Kaganu, the energy dipped. Her thoughts went straight to how much she disliked him. He looked boring, his grades were weak, and he had the kind of presence you forget as soon as he walks away. Still, she greeted him out of habit, and of course, he messed it up by calling her the wrong name. She tried to stay cool and corrected him, but he threw back some nonsense about how she was just a background character to him, said he hadn't been sleeping, and forgot her name. 3 months of sitting right next to each other, and the guy still didn't know her name. She bit her tongue, smiled through the irritation, and told herself it wasn't worth the drama. But then he guessed wrong again, and that was the last straw. She finally snapped a little and gave him her real name, Akane Nishino, before turning away. Sid just walked off like nothing happened, and she stood there watching him, low-key fuming. It wasn't even just the name, it was the way he never actually saw her, like she was air. Even when he looked her way, his eyes just slid past her like she wasn't there. That stung more than she wanted to admit, and no matter how much she told herself it didn't matter, it kept buzzing in her head. In class, people were swarming her with excitement about the school play she was part of, and while she smiled and nodded like always, her brain stayed stuck on Sid. She hated how much space he took up in her mind, especially since she'd done everything she could to ignore him completely. Meanwhile, Sid was just doing his own thing, sitting alone with a hand trainer, squeezing it like he was prepping for war. Later, Nishino went to the bathroom, her mind drifting back to the past, to that ugly middle school mess that made her quit showbiz and turned her into gossip bait for the media. Since then, she'd been playing this perfect girl act just to survive. Sid, on the other hand, was off on the school terrace, reading a magic book like he was planning something wild. Back in class, the teacher asked for school festival volunteers. Nishino raised her hand like a model student, but the teacher reminded her she had extra classes. The whole class laughed and she forced another smile. Then the teacher asked Sid, and he agreed without fuss. She watched quietly, thinking how all this time, she had been bending over backward to be liked by everyone. Always careful, always fake, because that's just how she stayed afloat. After school, she heard someone playing piano. It was Sid again, casually doing his own thing. She later tried calling her driver to go home, but no one picked up. He'd already been taken out by a bunch of goons. So, with no ride and no clue, she decided to walk, alone, for the first time in forever. Sid watched from above, already sensing something wasn't right. Nishino walked fast, feeling something weird creeping up behind her. When she turned around, there was a man standing. Her chest tightened, her legs took off before her brain did, but a car skidded in front of her, and a man jumped out, grabbed her, and everything went black. She woke up tied to a chair, surrounded by thugs arguing about what to do with her. One of them said they'd just collect ransom and bounce, but the other? He was saying some nasty stuff, bringing up her past trauma and hinting at more. It was gross. Then, glass shattered. Sid dropped in, wearing a mask, and the whole room went cold. The thugs stared, confused, asking who the hell he was, but he didn't bother giving them anything useful. Instead, he flew straight at the first guy and slammed him so hard it echoed. The second guy laughed like a fool, thinking he had it under control. Turns out the dude used to be in the army and thought Sid might actually give him a challenge. Sid didn't flinch, just smiled like this was the fight he'd been waiting for. They went at it hard. Sid got scratched up, took a few hits, but then he pulled out a crowbar and things got serious. The thug kept talking, saying there was no way Sid could win with a toy like that, but Sid didn't care. He moved like lightning, crushed the guy's hand, and reminded him that this wasn't even close to his peak. He mentioned something about taking down a motorcycle gang before, and it wasn't bragging. The way he moved now, you'd believe it. The thug, apparently known as Burga, started to panic. He tried to fight back, but Sid kicked out his leg, made him crumble, and then pounded his head like it was personal. Nishino sat there frozen, listening to those screams echo through the room all night. After the dust settled, Sid untied her, removed her gag, and dropped a quick warning about not walking home alone again. Then, just like that, he was gone. No name, no thanks, no trace. Later, the cops showed up along with Nishino's high-powered dad, who immediately pulled strings to shut everything down and keep her name out of the headlines. But the guy who actually saved her, his name didn't even come up. And somewhere out there, Sid stood in the shadows, thinking if that's how far he had to go for a decent fight, then maybe he still had a long road ahead before he could become the shadow he dreamed of being. Nishino stepped into school like it was just another ordinary morning, her voice cheerful as she greeted everyone with a good morning, wearing the same perfect smile that she always put on like armor. As she made her way down the hallway, everything seemed familiar, until her eyes landed on Sid. Unlike before, he looked right at her, greeted her back, and this time, he actually said her name correctly, which caught her completely off guard and made her pause mid-step. Although she'd been used to him getting her name wrong and acting like she didn't exist, today felt different, because not only did he get it right, but it also felt like he was really looking into her eyes instead of through her, which made her chest feel tight in a way she couldn't quite explain. In that moment, as her heartbeat picked up and her thoughts tangled, she realized something she had never noticed before. Sid, just like her, wore a mask too. Even though she had always assumed he was just indifferent or unaware, it suddenly made sense that he had been hiding something this whole time, because just like her, he was protecting something under the surface. And now, as that realization sank in, everything she thought she knew about him started to shift. But before she could sit with those feelings for long, the classroom TV lit up with a breaking news alert, and the entire room froze as the anchor's voice announced that a high school student named Sid Kaganu had been hit by a truck and died on the spot. According to the police report, it was an accident caused by the driver, and nothing could have been done to save him. As the shock settled in, Sid's voice began to echo in a flashback, calmly narrating over glimpses of his life, saying that every kid dreams of becoming a hero, and although most people let that dream go as they grow up, he never did, because he clung to it even tighter. While others moved on and accepted mediocrity, he chose to keep chasing something greater, and so he trained harder than anyone, learned everything he could, and kept his abilities hidden behind the image of an average, harmless boy. Even though it was easier to just fit in and be invisible, he deliberately stayed in the shadows because he knew that real strength comes from being underestimated. However, he also understood that no matter how much he trained or how many thugs he could beat down, he was still human, and eventually, there would be limits he couldn't break. After all, fists don't stop bullets, and martial arts won't save you from a missile or a nuke falling out of the sky. That's when the thought started creeping in. If he wanted to truly survive and make a mark, he couldn't stay human forever. He needed to become something more, something that could walk through explosions and come out untouched, something beyond flesh. And then, just like that, everything flipped again. Instead of waking up in a hospital or fading into the afterlife, Sid opened his eyes in a completely different world, where unfamiliar skies loomed overhead, and a group of girls stood surrounding him. Before he could say anything, they told him he was surrounded, that there was no way out, though strangely enough, they didn't seem hostile. In fact, they seemed excited. One girl spoke with a knowing smile, saying everything had gone according to plan, while another added that no one had made such a bold move in years, and that they had been waiting for this moment for a long time. While Sid stayed silent, taking it all in, agents could be seen moving quietly across town, slipping into place like they had been preparing for this day forever. Although the situation might have overwhelmed anyone else, Sid simply stood there, relaxed, his mind calm, as if this world, despite how bizarre it was, felt like home. For the first time, he didn't need to pretend, because here, power flowed through him, and magic bent to his will. He had everything he used to dream about: control, mystery, and strength far beyond what his old life could offer. So when he finally gave the order, the people around him moved instantly, obeying without hesitation. Standing above it all, he didn't imagine himself as a hero, nor did he aim to become some villain. What he wanted was something different, something deeper. He wanted to shape the story from the shadows, to make moves no one could see coming, and to build a legacy that would never need a spotlight. And so, with quiet resolve and a voice steady as stone, he declared that he would no longer chase someone else's idea of greatness, because this time he would become the one pulling the strings from the shadows. Alpha had been reading through some old scrolls, and after digging deep into the records, she found something about the cult of Diablos. The more she read, the more dangerous they sounded, but she stayed calm, said she could handle them, and didn't seem worried. Sid listened quietly, nodding like everything was going according to plan. He muttered something about living in the shadows and being one with them. In his mind, it all clicked. This was the moment he had been waiting for. From that point on, he started becoming the Eminence in shadow. Meanwhile, the news showed something wild. Sid, who had died in his previous life, had been reborn as a baby girl named Akane. But the weird thing was, the baby didn't cry at all. That silence felt off, and the mad people nearby started crying in this creepy way. Panic spread fast. Sid stood in the middle of it all, trying to figure out what kind of madness he had just walked into. Then, someone showed up, clearly happy to see Sid alive again. At the same time, Sid sensed something strange in the air. It was magic, thick and strong. His thoughts went back to his past life, where he always dreamed of gaining magic and becoming powerful, but that dream never came true. Now, though, the chance was real, and he wasn't going to waste it. With magic in his hands, he knew he could become something greater. Sid started training with his sister not long after. He mentioned something about being born under the balloon constellation. In their family, many had become dark knights, warriors who boosted their bodies with magic. Sid joined the training too, trying to smash a rock using a magical driver, but everyone's focus was on his sister, Clare. She was the chosen one, the family's hope. She broke a huge rock without breaking a sweat, and everyone clapped like she was royalty. Sid, on the other hand, acted like a weak trainee, but that was all just an act. In truth, he was hiding his real power. Later that night, Sid was seen taking down a group of branded enemies, laughing as he wiped them out one by one. He demanded to know where a jewel was, but when no one gave him answers, he got annoyed and used his slime weapon to finish the job. Suddenly, someone stabbed him from behind, but thanks to his custom suit, the wound healed right up. He beat the attacker, looted the rest, and walked away like it was just another day. Then he heard something behind him. He turned and saw a cage with a strange creature locked inside. The creature said his body was rotting, but he was still alive, almost like he was cursed. Sid checked it out, felt the magical overload, and realized this wasn't even his real body, which meant he could experiment all he wanted without worrying. He brought the creature home and started working on it. Most of his tests failed, but he didn't stop. After a month, he managed to remove the overload. Slowly, the creature started turning into a girl. When she was finally human again and had no clothes on, Sid respectfully stepped back and sat far away, keeping his cool. This was Shadow's big moment, and he needed to act like a proper legend. When the girl opened her eyes, he told her the curse was gone. She looked confused and said she didn't remember any curse. So Sid pulled out an old scripture and made up a story about how the demon Diablos had been defeated by 3 heroes. But before dying, Diablos cursed her bloodline, turning her into a monster. It was all fake, but Sid delivered it like a pro. He added that he couldn't tell her the mastermind's name, saying it would put her life at risk. But when she pushed him, he casually pointed to a bottle nearby with Cult of Diablos written on it and said that was the group responsible. He told her they worked in the shadows and never appeared in the light. He introduced himself again, properly this time, as Shadow, the one who moves through darkness and strikes from within. He said the path ahead would be full of pain and struggle, but it was the path he had chosen. Then he turned to her and said if she wanted, she could join him on that path. She paused, thinking it through, then said that ever since she got cursed, she had nothing left. But now, he had saved her. So if he wanted her help, she would walk beside him, even if it cost her life. They shook hands, and at the same time, Sid smiled to himself, admitting that he made up every part of that story, but it didn't matter. It worked. Then, he talked about what could happen next. One day, powerful leaders might come after them. He asked what she would do if that happened. She didn't blink. She said that no matter who came for them, she wouldn't back down. That made Sid grin. It was exactly what he wanted to hear. Then the two of them talked about gathering the other descendants of the ancient heroes, building their group stronger. From that moment on, their secret organization had a name, Shadow Garden, and she had a new identity too. From now on, she would be known as Alpha. 3 years had passed, and Sid was back at it, training with his sister Clare like always. She wasn't holding back, throwing heavy punches, kicks, and everything in between. But no matter how intense she got, Sid just took the hits, letting her think he was weaker, even though deep down, he knew he could end the fight in a blink if he really felt like it. He kept his strength hidden, just the way he liked it. Eventually, Clare knocked him into the river, shook her head, and sighed. She complained like always, saying he never seemed to improve. Just then, the maid came over to tell them guests had arrived for Clare's farewell party. Clare turned to Sid and said she wouldn't be around to train with him for the next few days, so he should keep practicing on his own. As she walked off, Sid sat there, dripping wet but completely unbothered. To him, being a background character had its charm. He had grown powerful enough to do anything, but he still preferred to wait in the shadows, keeping his strength under wraps, saving it for the right moment. He knew that once someone turned 15 and became a Dark Knight, they could enter Midgar Academy. It was the place where skills got sharper and magic knowledge ran deep. Today was Clare's turn to leave home and begin her journey. But on the big day, something strange happened. Her room was a mess, and she was gone. No note, no trace. Sid stood there, calm but confused. Clare was strong, one of the best. Whoever had taken her must have been bold and dangerous. Their mother stormed in, yelling at their father, blaming him for wasting time. The house filled with shouting and blame, but Sid didn't stick around. Quietly, he slipped away. In the shadows, a small truth came to light. Their maid, the one working at the house, wasn't just a servant. She was Beta, one of Sid's new recruits. Just like Alpha, new members were being gathered one by one, almost like collecting rare pieces for something bigger. Sid asked about Alpha, and Beta told him she was already out there, chasing leads on Clare. He nodded, quietly impressed at how fast Alpha moved. Then he asked if Clare was still alive. Beta said most likely yes. According to her, the ones behind this mess were part of the cult of Diablos. Sid narrowed his eyes and asked why they'd want Clare. Beta explained that the cult believed she might be a descendant of the ancient heroes. That made Sid think. Normal people were getting dragged into this now, being labeled as special just because of some old bloodline theory. To him, it felt like the cult was slowly going off the rails, seeing enemies in everyone. Beta kept scanning the map for the enemy's hideout but had no luck. Out of frustration, she stabbed a knife into the map, and by pure luck, she hit the exact location. Earlier, Sid had casually thrown a knife too, and somehow that random throw had also landed right on the mark. That's when Beta realized this was it. They had found the hideout. Somewhere else, Clare was being held captive. A man spoke gently, saying he didn't want to hurt her since he had a daughter himself. But right after that, he kicked at her. Clare dodged it and fought back, which clearly shocked him. Even with magic sealing chains wrapped around her, she was still fast and sharp. He called it impressive, and she just smirked. Clare told him that power wasn't just about magic. It was about how someone used it. That was something her brother had once taught her. She laughed, standing tall, ready for round 2. Every time she fought, she usually learned something new from her brother. But this time, after fighting this man, she hadn't learned a thing. Beating him was going to feel even better. The man said he'd heard stories, how once, when Clare was possessed, it was her brother who saved her. But that made her snap. She shouted that it never happened, that she had tried to correct that story so many times, but no one ever believed her. According to her, there was no way that boy could have saved her. The man kept smiling and said he wanted to know more about her brother. That was the final straw. Clare broke free from her chains, pure rage in her eyes. She rushed at him, shouting that if anything ever happened to her brother, she'd destroy him, his friends, and his entire bloodline. He punched her hard, knocking her out cold. As she lay there, he said the experiment would be over soon. He just needed to test her blood and confirm if she was compatible. Suddenly, one of his men came running in, panicked and breathless. Someone had broken in. A group, moving like ghosts in the dark, had taken out all of their men. The kidnapper was stunned. He had no idea who could be this fast and deadly. Then Alpha appeared. She stepped into the room without fear and told him they were Shadow Garden. She said they already knew everything. The cult, the revivers, all of it. The man froze, overwhelmed. He He had no idea how they'd found out such deep secrets. In panic, he lunged at Alpha, but she didn't flinch. She took him down without breaking a sweat. The kidnapper, beaten but not ready to give up, pulled out one last trick. He swallowed a strange substance. His body surged with raw power, and in a burst of rage, he launched a fresh attack toward Alpha. But even with the boost, he wasn't fast enough. Alpha was still stronger, quicker, and sharper. When he realized he couldn't win, he used magic to dig through the ground and fled, disappearing below. Another girl stepped up, ready to chase him, but Alpha stopped her, saying it wasn't necessary. He wasn't running away. He was heading straight toward Shadow himself. The girl looked confused for a moment, wondering if that was the reason he took a different route and split off from the others. Somewhere underground, Sid, still playing his shadow role, was completely lost. He wasn't tracking anyone, just casually walking through the tunnels with no idea where he was. As fate would have it, the kidnapper came charging straight at him. Sid barely blinked. With zero effort, he blocked the man's powered-up sword using only the tip of his own blade. Calm as ever, he pointed out that even though the man had more magic than Alpha, he didn't know how to use it right. That stung. The kidnapper snapped and attacked again, but Sid dodged him with ease. Then, with a smirk, he said he'd teach him something useful. 3 steps to properly use his strength. Step 1. Channel just a small amount of magic into the legs to boost speed. He showed it off by vanishing and appearing behind the man in a flash. Step 2. Keep the perfect distance. With that, speed and magic weren't even needed. And step 3. Sid leaned in, grinning, and said this was just the warm-up. The kidnapper groaned under the pressure, saying he hadn't taken a hit like that since training under his teacher. Still, he wasn't done. He said Shadow didn't understand true darkness, the kind that went deeper than any human mind could handle. Then, he swallowed more of that strange substance, pushing his body further, drawing out a new weapon and going all in. But Sid didn't even flinch. He blocked the weapon like it was nothing, and with one massive release of magic, he ended it. The air cracked with raw force as the kidnapper collapsed. He couldn't believe what just happened. It wasn't just about skill. Everything about Shadow felt stronger, cleaner, sharper. Maybe the world's darkness wasn't as terrifying as this one boy standing before him. The man looked down at the pendant around his neck. Inside was a small picture of his daughter. With a fading breath, he whispered her name, Melia, and then went silent. Sid looked at the pendant, muttered that the guy may have been old, but still strong, and walked away without looking back. He narrated that this was how the night ended, and with it, the rescue mission was complete. Later, he said he had unlocked Claire's magical chains. The next day, she came home alone. Her body was torn up, her spirit even worse, but she kept her head high and acted like nothing had happened. The damage was clear, but she didn't talk about it. Back at the castle, Sid stood with all the girls. He stared out toward the capital, thinking how boring this village felt in comparison. The real story had to be out there, where the main characters were probably making moves and maybe a final boss was already waiting. But he wasn't worried. He still had 2 years before he could go. Until then, Alpha and the others would keep moving forward in his name. The Cult of Diablos was a massive group, spread across different parts of the world, always working from the shadows. Over time, a few people who were once close to Sid decided to walk away, saying they wanted to fight against the cult from a different path. But Sid knew that wasn't really the case. People had grown up and some had simply outgrown the fantasy. They weren't leaving to fight, they were just freeing themselves. The truth was, the act they had kept up for so long couldn't go on forever. Sid understood that. People move on, and when they grow older, they tend to forget their old heroes. In his past life, Sid had always fought alone. It wasn't until much later that the story of his death became clear. During one training session, he had been trying to master magic, but things didn't go as planned. He hit his head on a big rock, lost his balance, fell off a cliff, rolled down the mountain, and ended up on the road, where a truck hit him. And just like that, he died. Still, he smiled. Even now, if he were the only person left in the entire world, he'd still work hard toward becoming the Eminence in Shadow. A new chapter began when Sid stepped off the train and entered the Ambedkar Kingdom, a place with more than 1 million people. Now that he was 15, it was time for him to join Midgar Academy, the same place his sister had already been attending. She was aiming to become a Dark Knight. Sid explained that Midgar Academy wasn't just any school. It was well respected and attracted students from all over the kingdom and beyond. It had a system that felt more like a medical institute. Despite not having any powerful connections, Sid somehow got in. Even so, he wasn't treated like a main character. He ended up in a cheap apartment far from the fancy dorms. When he reached his department, he met up with his friend, and they walked together. Sid believed his friend was also a background character, just like him. Most students traveled to the academy by train, though it was always packed and sweaty. Sid wished he could stay in the dorms, like the rich students, but his friend reminded him that nobles would never let low-ranking students live in the same place. Sid said that maybe if they became top students, like his sister, they might get the chance. His friend laughed and said that was a fantasy for people like them. Sid smiled, saying he had already spent 7 months at Midgar and had become a perfectly average background character. But his friend wasn't impressed. He reminded Sid about the test they took yesterday and how Sid failed it badly. Then he brought up the penalty. The punishment was simple but brutal. Sid had to propose to the most popular girl in the academy and get rejected in front of everyone. Sid, on the other hand, was thrilled. This was exactly the kind of background character experience he had been craving. When they reached the academy, they saw Princess Alexia turning down yet another proposal. She was beautiful, famous, and clearly not interested in romance. Everyone knew she'd probably end up in a political marriage after graduation. Still, some said the boy she rejected wasn't completely hopeless, maybe good enough for casual fun. Sid's friend looked nervous and asked if he was really going through with it, but Sid had already made up his mind. He had spent the whole night preparing the perfect proposal. A few moments later, he stood in front of Princess Alexia, nerves kicking in, and asked her to be his girlfriend. In his mind, he was waiting for the ultimate rejection, that classic background character embarrassment. But something completely unexpected happened. Alexia didn't reject him. Instead, she grabbed his hand and agreed. She told him she had been waiting for someone like him. And just like that, a relationship began. Sid was stunned. In his head, he was screaming, trying to figure out how he had suddenly become the lead in some weird romantic comedy. Later, in the cafeteria, Sid sat with his lunch, and all eyes were on him. The other students glared, clearly annoyed that someone like him, a bottom-rank nobody, was dating the princess. He joined his friends, who were just as confused. They asked if he really thought he deserved her. Sid admitted it felt strange, since the gap between them was massive. His friend told him to stop overthinking it. If he was lucky, he might as well enjoy it. He even joked about taking his place. That's when Alexia arrived. She casually walked over and asked if she could join them. Everyone froze. Then she pushed Sid off his seat and took it for herself. She ordered lunch for both of them like it was normal. The students around them whispered in disbelief, unable to understand how someone like Sid could sit beside royalty. Sid figured he might as well go all in. He ate messily, hoping she'd find it gross and break up with him, but she just laughed. She brought up fencing class later that day and said they should go together. Sid tried to protest, mentioning that he was in Section 9, the lowest section in the school, but Alexia told him she had already taken care of it. She got him moved to Section 1. Another plan ruined. During fencing class, Sid introduced himself. The instructor wasn't just anyone. He was an official royal trainer. Only the top sections got trainers like him. The fencing style they taught came from the legendary Bushin school, a serious style once mastered by powerful knights. It wasn't easy to learn, but thanks to Princess Iris, Alexia's older sister, the tradition stayed alive. The school's rule was simple. If you were strong, you would rise. The instructor asked Sid how strong he really was. Training began, and students started learning the basics. Sid ended up paired with Alexia. As he watched her movements, he noticed something odd. Her attacks were sloppy, her magic was barely there, and her timing felt off. At first, he thought maybe she was adjusting to his level, but that wasn't the case. The class focused on strikes and counterattacks. Her technique looked clean, but there was no force behind it. Everyone knew Alexia was weaker than her sister, who was considered the kingdom's strongest dark knight. Alexia's weaknesses showed in her footwork, timing, and the fact that she had learned it all from scratch without natural talent. At the end of the training session, the instructor wrapped things up, saying practice was done for the day. Alexia thanked Sid for the match, admitted his fencing style was good, but also said she couldn't stand it. When she looked at him, it was like staring at a mirror, too familiar, too similar. After that, she walked straight over to the instructor and gave a clear answer. She told him her decision was final, and she was going to stick with it. According to her, if she became Sid's girlfriend, then Zeno had no reason to stay involved anymore. But Zeno wasn't ready to back down. He gave her a look and reminded her that she couldn't avoid him forever. Sid, who had zero interest in the drama, quietly slipped away without saying a word. Later, Sid and Alexia sat together, and the mood had definitely shifted. Sid asked if she was just using him to avoid an engagement with Zeno, pointing out how she chose a low-rank student like him just to play the part. He added that he didn't want to be dragged into her personal mess. Alexia didn't like his tone and reminded him that he was supposed to be her boyfriend. But Sid wasn't having it. He told her that their relationship was fake anyway, and that she had crossed the line by confusing him with pretend feelings. Alexia revealed that she had talked to his friends earlier and heard everything. She warned him that playing around with a girl's heart wasn't a small thing, and if the other students found out what was really going on, his peaceful school life would be over. That got Sid a little nervous. She leaned in and said that if he didn't want trouble, he had better act like her boyfriend properly. Once Zeno gave up and stopped following her, then the act could be dropped. Sid muttered that it probably wouldn't work. Someone like him didn't even belong in her world. Alexia admitted she knew that, but said she just needed a little time. The rest, she could handle on her own. Sid sighed under his breath, already sensing this wouldn't end well. Then she tossed a coin at him. Sid looked at her and said that money wasn't going to win him over. But she stood there unfazed and told him otherwise. He walked over to the coin, picked it up, and nodded. She threw another coin, and this time he caught it with his mouth, saying even someone with shadow ambitions had bills to pay, and opportunities like this couldn't be wasted. Alexia smirked and called him her dog, telling him to do whatever she said. And just like that, Sid continued the fake relationship, while the rest of the academy stared in disbelief. For Sid, it wasn't all bad. Everyone's attention was locked on the fact that Alexia had a boyfriend now, so nobody noticed him playing the perfect background character right in the middle of the spotlight. As they were heading out, Alexia spotted Gino talking to a group of boys. Soon after, they boarded the train, and Alexia started ranting about Gino again. She complained that just because he knew a little swordsmanship, he acted like he was above everyone. Meanwhile, Sid just nodded and thought to himself that Alexia showed one face to the world but talked trash behind people's backs. Arguing with her wasn't worth the effort, so he decided to keep following her orders like a well-trained bot. They stopped at an ice cream shop. Alexia bought them both cones and said it was just to show the world that they were a couple. Sid then asked her why she was so against marrying Gino, since he looked perfect from the outside. She immediately said that was exactly the problem. She hated everything about him. Sid pointed out how Geno had looks, money, status, and fame. But Alexia cut through it all, saying it was fake. Acting perfect was easy. She knew, because she did it too. She told Sid that she didn't judge people by what they showed on the surface. When Sid asked how she judged him, she said it was through his flaws. He wasn't perfect, but he was honest about it, and that made it easier to be around him. Sid accepted that as a compliment. Then he asked what flaws Gino had. She said none. That made it sound like Gino was ideal, but Alexia disagreed. To her, anyone who looked flawless was either hiding something or just not right in the head. Then she handed Sid a thick report and called him her dog again. 2 weeks passed in their so-called relationship, and not much had changed. On another train ride, Alexia brought up his fencing again. She said it was still confusing. His basics were clean, but the rest of his style was rough and unpredictable. Even so, she couldn't stop watching him. Sid thanked her, but she added that she still hated him. She mentioned how his fencing had been slow and a little too aggressive today. She also confessed that growing up, she had always wanted to be like her sister, but she just couldn't. So she carved out her own path to become strong. People had given her a title, Fencer Princess, but deep down, she felt her style was ordinary, just like his. Sid replied that he didn't see that as a bad thing. In fact, he liked her fencing style just the way it was. Alexia paused for a moment, her voice dropping a bit, and said someone had once told her the same thing. It was after she lost badly at the Bushin Festival. Her sister had tried to comfort her with those words, but it never helped because her sister never really understood what she was going through. That loss had left a crack in her confidence, and from that day on, she began to hate her original fencing style. Sid responded calmly, saying he wasn't some great person either. If the world was falling apart somewhere far away, he wouldn't care much. But he did care about a few things, even if others found them worthless or silly. Those small things mattered to him, and that's why he liked her fencing. It had heart. Alexia didn't take it well. She suddenly pulled out her sword, visibly annoyed, and demanded to know what he meant by that. Sid simply brushed it off, saying it was nothing serious, but if he had to explain, it was just that he got angry when people disrespected something he liked. Soon after, they reached the train station. The driver noticed her sword and looked alarmed, so Alexia quickly put it away, gave Sid a quick goodbye, and walked off. Watching her go, Sid realized their fake relationship, something he never asked for in the first place, was finally over. The next morning, Sid was on his way to school with his usual group of friends. They were already teasing him, asking if anything had happened between him and the princess during those 2 strange weeks. Sid replied that nothing happened at all. They rolled their eyes and started mocking him, saying he should have at least kissed her. One of them joked that if they had been in his place, they wouldn't have left any opportunity untouched. When they got to school, the mood shifted. Jeno and some others were waiting, and they didn't look friendly. Jeno stepped forward and said that Princess Alexia hadn't returned to her dorm the previous night. She had completely vanished, and the last person anyone had seen her with was Sid. That made him the main suspect. As tension grew, Sid was questioned, while the others around him got ready for a fight. But instead of resisting, Sid raised his hands and surrendered. He didn't want to make things worse. While standing there, surrounded and under suspicion, Sid kept his cool, but deep down, he finally understood. This time, he was seriously in trouble. Deep under the city, hidden in a maze of dark tunnels, Alexia Midgar slowly opened her eyes and realized she was trapped in a cold cell, her arms and legs tightly locked with magic sealing chains. While adjusting to the strange silence, she started thinking about Sid and where he might be. But then her eyes landed on a creepy humanoid creature sitting quietly in the cell next to hers. She didn't panic, just calmly accepted that she had been kidnapped, though she had no clue by who. Not long after, a man in a dirty lab coat walked in, his face wild with excitement as he talked about getting royal blood. Alexia barely reacted, just wondered what he wanted with her blood, while the man ranted about demons and reviving something dark and dangerous. For now, she didn't resist, choosing instead to wait, confident that someone would come for her eventually. Above ground, things weren't looking great for Sid Kaganu either. Accused of being the one who kidnapped Alexia, he was now locked in a room by the Night Order, getting punched and kicked by 2 officers who kept demanding the truth. They yelled at him, asked over and over where the princess was, but Sid stayed calm, on the inside, at least. While his body took the hits, his mind was elsewhere, slightly thrilled at being part of such a cliché scene, like something straight out of a dramatic story. He even started acting the part, crying loudly and begging for mercy when they brought out 3 huge needles. His performance was spot on, but deep down, he was honestly bored and just wondering when it would all end. Back at Midgar Academy, Zenon Griffey met up with Princess Iris Midgar to update her on the situation. He felt guilty about what had happened to Alexia, but Iris told him not to blame himself and reminded him that the only priority now was to find her sister. Zenon said there was some weak evidence pointing to Sid, though he admitted it didn't really make sense, since Sid wasn't strong enough to overpower Alexia. They had even tortured him for 5 days straight, but he still hadn't confessed. Just kept saying he was innocent. Iris decided to release him, though she ordered the knights to keep an eye on him from a distance, just in case. Zenon agreed it was the safest move, and though he wanted to trust Sid, he still thought caution was necessary. Iris also hoped Sid wasn't involved, but they both knew they had to wait for more information before drawing any conclusions. Still, she couldn't hide her worry for Alexia. As she looked at an old photo of her sister with Sid, she realized how distant they had become lately. There was a time when the 2 sisters could understand each other perfectly just through sparring, but now it had been so long since they'd even talked. Outside the academy, Clare was desperate to speak to the knights and defend her brother, trying to convince them he couldn't be guilty. Other students tried to stop her, not wanting her to stir up more trouble. Iris, watching from above, told Zenon to keep the students safe. Seeing Clare's determination made Iris think back to her own bond with Alexia and how much she missed it. Rose Oriana eventually had to step in to stop Clare, even trying to put her under detention, but Clare wasn't having it. She broke free after dislocating Rose's shoulder, though more students quickly stepped in to hold her back. Meanwhile, Sid had finally been released. Still in his underwear, he got tossed out of the Night Order building along with his confiscated stuff. Later that evening, fully dressed again, Sid sat quietly on the train back to his dorm. his face blank, but his mind thinking about how easy it would be to heal his wounds. But since background characters didn't do flashy things like that, he let the bruises stay. He noticed 2 knights following him from a distance, clearly assigned to keep tabs on him. When the train reached the next stop, Sid got off casually, and of course the knights followed him. As he walked past a figure in a white hood, he heard a soft voice whisper the word, "Later." The hooded person brushed past him, long blonde hair catching the light, and before Sid could even turn around, he heard 2 quiet thuds. The knights had been taken out. When Sid finally reached his dorm and opened the door, he was surprised to find Alpha already inside, dressed in the Midgar Girls' Academy uniform. She handed him a sandwich, and he thanked her, wondering aloud why she came when it was supposed to be Beta's turn to check on him. Alpha explained that she had returned because she'd heard about his situation and got worried. Sid nodded and agreed. It had been quite a day. While munching on the sandwich, Sid asked how things were going. Alpha filled him in, saying Shadow Garden had been growing rapidly, their investigations had brought in more results, and they were finally gathering real information on the cult of Diablos. She also mentioned that while the cult was still bigger, Shadow Garden's influence had been rising steadily. Listening to her, Sid thought to himself how the girls had probably been living pretty normal lives on the surface, yet they still found time to visit him and play along with his shadow act. That made him smile a little, because even though he didn't say it out loud, he truly appreciated them for sticking around and treating his game like something that mattered. After finishing his sandwich, Sid casually tossed the wrapper under the trash bin and flopped onto his bed without a care, but Alpha, always sharp and responsible, picked it up and dropped it properly in the bin while reminding him to change his clothes and take the situation seriously. She tried to explain that if they didn't act soon, he'd end up being blamed for everything, but Sid, ever laid back, just smirked and said his title as the son of a broke baron made him the perfect fall guy, so it wasn't a big deal. While Alpha started changing out of her academy uniform, she explained how the Night Order couldn't be trusted anymore, hinting that the cult might have already slipped inside. She also confirmed that Alexia was definitely kidnapped, and the cult's goal was to extract her blood because royal blood carried more of the hero's essence. Since they needed her alive for that process, Alexia was probably still safe, at least for now. Still, Alpha couldn't understand why Sid even got involved with Alexia in the first place, but Sid made it clear it had nothing to do with romance, which she accepted. She figured he must be carrying some heavy burden, and she hoped he could start trusting them more, to which Sid agreed, saying he would. Switching into her slime bodysuit, Alpha teased him, saying he owed her a tuna sandwich now since he ate hers, and she wanted to be treated to Tuna King after all this mess was over. She told him to lie low at the dorms and wait for her signal. Just before leaving, Alpha asked if he wanted her to deal with the knights who interrogated him, but Sid shrugged it off, saying they were just doing their job, and in fact, they deserved a little surprise. Alpha agreed to let it go for now, but reminded him that Delta was also in the capital because she'd missed him, which genuinely surprised Sid. Later that night, Clare was still fuming over what the knights had done to her brother and wanted to punish them herself, but Rose Oriana had to step in once again, forcing Clare to calm down and go back to her room. Meanwhile, Sid had spent the last 2 days planning, and now he was finally ready. He cleared out his entire dorm room, stuffed everything into storage, and transformed the place into something worthy of the Eminence in shadow. He decorated it with expensive wine, rare paintings, antique lamps, and other elegant pieces, items he'd collected by hunting bandits and squeezing a bit of gold out of Alexia. As a final touch, he placed a letter on the table, setting the mood just right as he waited for the moment to strike. When night finally fell, Beta arrived at Sid's dorm and was blown away by the luxurious makeover. She stood in awe, then turned to hear Sid's declaration. It was time for the world of shadow to rise. Drinking from a wine glass, Sid welcomed the night as Beta nodded with excitement, agreeing that tonight, with the moon hidden, was the perfect time. She reported that under Alpha's orders, all 114 members of Shadow Garden had gathered in the capital, ready to launch a coordinated strike. Sid raised an eyebrow at the number, and Beta hesitated for a moment when he mumbled something about hiring extras, but she chose to let it slide. Beta explained that they would be launching a citywide raid against all Fenrir Sect hideouts of the cult of Diablos, using the chaos as a cover to find and rescue Alexia. Alpha, Gamma, Delta, and Epsilon all had their roles, and each team was already moving into place, Before she could finish explaining the unit formations, Sid handed her a letter from the knights who once interrogated him. He said to pass it on to Delta as an apology, because he was about to take her role in the operation. Then, with the wind blowing through the open window, Sid stepped forward and declared that the world would finally know their name. Somewhere in a quiet alley, the two knights who had interrogated Sid waited impatiently for backup, annoyed that they hadn't heard anything from the surveillance team. They guessed the team was just being lazy or clueless about the cult's true horrors. When Sid appeared before them, they quickly threw Alexia's boot at him and started spinning lies, saying it was all proof of his guilt. They were ready to arrest or even kill him. But before they could act, Sid dropped two unconscious bodies behind them, the same knights who had been tailing him. The two corrupt officers were shocked, and in the next moment, Sid cut them down without hesitation. One of the injured men warned him that he was done for now, but Sid, transforming into shadow, simply told him that everything would be over by sunrise, then ended it. Back at her base, Beta, still thrilled by what happened, quickly jotted everything down in her journal titled Chronicles of Master Shadow, capturing every detail of Sid's heroic moment. But her writing was interrupted by a loud explosion that echoed across the city. Sid immediately recognized the sound. It had to be Delta, and it signaled the start of their attack. Delta, wild and unstoppable, destroyed one of the cult's hideouts completely, reducing the building to rubble in seconds. At the same time, Alpha calmly monitored the entire operation, making sure every team was on task. Princess Iris, hearing the reports from her guards, was informed that multiple ambushes had taken place all over the capital. 8 locations had already been destroyed in quick succession, creating mass confusion. Realizing things were spiraling out of control, Iris ordered her men to double down on protecting the academy while she prepared to go out herself and put an end to the chaos. Deep underground, in a dark and filthy lair, Alexia could suddenly hear loud noises coming from above. Realizing something big was about to go down, she quickly told the others in nearby cells to get up because things were about to get interesting. Within seconds, the crazed doctor rushed into her cell, dragging his weird equipment and ranting that they were coming to wipe everyone out. While Alexia tried to calm him down, thinking the Night Order had arrived to save her, the doctor wasn't worried about any knights. He just kept ranting about killing them all, which left her completely confused. Shaking and desperate, the doctor picked up a massive syringe and, with wild eyes, started talking about Diablos as if it were some god. He turned toward a deformed creature in the next cell and jabbed it with the prototype injection, claiming the thing would finally work, even if the subject was considered a failed result. As the thick liquid entered the creature's body, it started to grow larger and stronger, turning into a hulking beast. The doctor, thrilled by the result, stood there like a madman, soaking in the chaos, right before the creature broke free and killed him instantly. To Alexia's surprise, the same creature that just turned the doctor into paste turned around and slashed her chains, setting her free. Thinking her luck had finally turned, she tried to escape by following the monster's path upward, but her exit was already blocked by piles of debris. Left with no choice, she began searching through the underground tunnels for another way out. As she reached a sewer junction, Alexia ran straight into Zenon, only this time his nice guy mask was completely gone. With a smug smile, he casually explained that this secret lab was something he funded himself, and he was the one who had the princess kidnapped. After spending days as a lab rat, Alexia was furious to hear the truth, but at the same time, she wasn't surprised. Deep down, she always felt like Zenon was a bit off, and now she was just glad to finally be proven right. But Zenon didn't care about her opinion. All he needed was her blood and the dead doctor's research. With both in hand, he was confident he'd rise straight into the 12th seat of the rounds and finally leave behind his boring instructor job. Alexia, disgusted, realized this rounds thing must be some cult full of lunatics. Zenon, with full arrogance, explained that the Knights of Rounds were the top 12 knights in the cult, people with power and riches that completely dwarfed his current rank. He even had the nerve to say that he'd rather have Iris as his prize, but Alexia would do just fine. That was the final straw for Alexia. Burning with rage, she launched herself at Zenon, sword in hand, but Zenon effortlessly blocked her attacks, mocking her along the way and saying she'd never be anything more than a cheap imitation of her sister. His words cut deep, but Alexia didn't back down. She let her magic surge through her body, pushed it into her sword, and copied Iris's fighting style. Her blade sliced through and left a wound on Zenon. something he clearly didn't expect. But the moment didn't last long. Zenon, now serious, revealed his true strength. With one sharp move, he disarmed her and sent her flying into the cold sewer water with a brutal punch. Standing tall, he laughed and told her she'd never reach her sister's level, ordering her to stop resisting and come with him. Just then, a figure stepped out from the shadows. Calm and collected, Sid made his entrance and introduced himself as Shadow, bringing the whole place to a halt. As Shadow calmly stepped forward, he introduced himself in front of Princess Alexia Midgar and Zenon Griffey. Zenon, who had already heard rumors about a man in black destroying several small cult bases, recognized him immediately, but instead of being impressed, he just laughed and called Shadow a coward, saying he only targeted weaklings and never dared to face the cult's core members. Zenon, full of pride, declared himself one of those core members and claimed he was aiming to become the 12th seed of the rounds. He said he would defeat Shadow right here and prove his worth. Zenon launched a powerful attack that created a blast so strong, thick dust filled the air. But when it cleared, he realized Shadow was no longer in front of him. Instead, Shadow had already moved behind him in a flash, now standing between Zenon and Princess Alexia, cool and calm. While Zenon fumed, Shadow mocked him again, casually asking about those so-called core members he boasted about. That same night, rain poured over the Midgar kingdom as panic spread. The capital city was thrown into chaos, and the Night Order was forced into an emergency operation. They rushed to evacuate civilians while a monstrous creature, enhanced by the cult, emerged from underground and started attacking the city. The knights tried to hold it off as they guided people to safety, but their swords and magic did nothing. The monster's wounds healed instantly, and it just kept going. So the Order had no choice but to call every available unit nearby to hold it back with everything they had. Amid the chaos, Iris Midgar arrived, saw the destruction, and jumped into the fight. She landed a strong blow that actually left a mark on the beast, then ordered the knights to fall back. She added more power and managed to cut off its right arm, pushing the monster into a nearby building using her overwhelming magic. But the monster simply regenerated again. Frustrated by the regeneration, she decided she would just slice it into pieces so small it wouldn't be able to come back. Just when Iris was ready to launch another attack, having already wounded the monster several times with her sword, a mysterious woman suddenly appeared and interrupted the battle. She calmly said she understood the monster's pain and would end its suffering. Iris, confused and angry, wanted to know who this woman was, but the stranger simply introduced herself as Alpha. She stepped in and, without wasting time, poured magic into her sword and landed a single powerful slash that instantly defeated the monster and returned it to its original human form. Alpha then picked up a small pendant that had fallen. A photo of Viscount Grease and his daughter Milia was inside. Without showing much emotion, Alpha told Iris to just stand back and enjoy the show like a spectator while her team handled the situation, making it clear she didn't want anyone getting in Shadow Garden's way. Meanwhile, down below in the city's underground tunnels, Shadow was still fighting Zenon. Zenon, who had underestimated his opponent, finally admitted that Shadow was far stronger than he expected. Even though those destroyed bases were small, Shadow had wiped them out so easily that now Zenon decided to stop holding back. He started using more magical power, and Alexia could feel the surge. Zenon was clearly much stronger now than before. But no matter how much Zenon powered up, Shadow kept dodging and parrying like it was nothing. His movements were sharp and easy, and he wasn't even breaking a sweat. Eventually, Shadow started mocking Zenon's so-called elite swordsmanship, calling him weak and pretending to be impressed. That triggered Zenon completely. His rage exploded, and he charged in, throwing out wave after wave of fierce attacks. Shadow, still calm and composed, blocked everything. Their intense clash started shaking the underground so violently that the walls cracked, and the sewers felt like they would collapse at any moment. Up above, Alexia was watching it all, stunned by Shadow's swordplay. She noticed something familiar about his moves. It wasn't flashy or unique. It was clean, basic, and controlled, just like the kind of sword style she had trained in all her life. For a moment, her mind drifted back to her childhood. Back then, she always dreamed of being strong like her sister Iris, but she had no special talent. People would laugh at her and call her fencing boring and weak. They gave her the name Fencer Ordinaire, mocking her for sticking to the basics with no real power behind it. But seeing Shadow move like that, using the very same kind of swordplay she had always been told was useless, it made something click inside her. Now, she finally understood why Iris once praised her technique. Shadow's style wasn't just good, it was exactly what she had always believed in, but never dared to pursue fully. Then, without hesitation, Shadow gave Zenon a fatal slash. As Zenon collapsed, wounded and furious, he demanded to know Shadow's real name. He couldn't understand why someone so powerful would keep hiding his identity. Shadow, still calm and smiling, simply said that they were Shadow Garden. They move in darkness, strike from the shadows, and that's what they exist for. Zenon thought the man was crazy, and even Alexia, left speechless by everything, stood there more confused than ever, trying to understand what kind of war she had just witnessed and who these shadowy people really were. Zenon, full of pride and arrogance, pulled out a bottle filled with red pills, claiming they would awaken a power beyond human limits, something normal people couldn't handle without dying. He swallowed several of them at once, and soon his body began to change, growing stronger and more monstrous as he called himself the Third Awakened, while Shadow stood there, clearly unimpressed and even a little disappointed. Zenon's magical power grew stronger, his sword pulsing with energy as he confidently launched an attack, but Shadow easily blocked it once again, clearly unbothered, calling the power disgusting. While still holding his ground against Zenon's attack, Shadow calmly reminded him that real strength shouldn't come from shortcuts or borrowed power, since it's an insult to true might. Without hesitation, Shadow threw away his sword and started using only his bare hands, pushing Zenon back with clean and sharp hits, even landing a solid kick to the head. Even with all that so-called power from the red pills, Zenon couldn't keep up and got tossed around like a rag doll. Shadow crushed the pill bottle underfoot, set a glowing magic circle around Zenon, keeping Alexia safe, and began powering up. Zenon, clearly terrified, could barely process what he was seeing as Shadow's magical energy grew to a level that made even the enhanced swordsman panic. Then, in a calm tone, Shadow talked about a man who once trained endlessly to survive a nuclear explosion, building his body, mind, and skill to impossible levels, but still couldn't reach that goal until he realized the answer wasn't to resist the bomb, but to become the bomb itself. That's the level Shadow had reached, as Zenon, now trembling, made a desperate swing at Shadow. His sword shattered into pieces on contact, while his face twisted in hopeless fear. Then Shadow released his ultimate attack, casually unleashing it with a low chant, "I am atomic." The moment he said it, the underground was consumed by a massive explosion. Zenon was erased in an instant, and the entire hidden facility, along with several city blocks above it, turned into a smoking crater. Alexia, shielded by the magic circle, stood untouched at the center of the devastation, surrounded by silence under the now clear night sky. She looked down, found her sword, and practiced a few moves, noticing her technique felt sharper and more refined, almost like she'd found a new reason to keep going. Moments later, Iris arrived at full speed, relieved beyond words to find her little sister alive, and she pulled her into a hug, holding her tightly. The next morning at school, Sid met Alexia again. She had returned, acting like everything was normal, and updated him on the situation. Everyone believed the case had been resolved, and Sid's name had been cleared completely. But Alexia had a gut feeling something darker was hiding behind the scenes, something not yet uncovered. Before he could leave, she thanked him, saying that someone had made her finally appreciate her fencing style again, though she didn't name who. Before Sid could walk away, Alexia reminded him that they had been pretending to be a couple, and hinted maybe they could keep the act going now that Zenon was out of the picture, but Sid declined, brushing it off. She smiled coldly, then slashed him across the chest in one swift motion, blood splashing across the wall. Later that day, a large amount of blood was discovered behind the school building, but no body was ever found, and no one was reported missing or injured. Eventually, the incident was added to the school's growing list of unsolved mysteries and became known as the bodiless murder. Elsewhere, at a massive building in the center of the capital, the Seven Shadows gathered to discuss their next moves. They were satisfied, knowing that the cult's Fenrir faction had lost all its secret bases, especially the one that held Princess Alexia. Zenon was gone without a trace, and Shadow's overwhelming attack from the night before had shaken the city. The girls were still in awe, remembering how the magic lit up the entire capital like a sign from above, believing the cult had now seen who the real hunters were. As their meeting continued, Beta shared a report from Zeta, who had located the next target and was waiting to move, while Ida's research was coming along well. Then Alpha brought up a serious problem. Someone out there was pretending to be Shadow Garden, carrying out killings in their name, spreading fear and chaos. The girls were furious, especially Delta and Epsilon, who silently fumed at the damage being done to their name, but Gamma assured them that whoever was behind it would not escape Shadow Garden's eyes. Back at the massive crater, Iris held a private meeting with Glenn and Marco Granger inside a tent. They quietly discussed what they'd learned, that two powerful secret organizations, Shadow Garden and the Cult of Diablos, were moving behind the scenes. Iris felt unsure, especially since Zenon, once hailed as one of the kingdom's finest swordsmen, turned out to be a member of the cult. Because of that, Iris decided to form a new investigation team under her direct control and asked Glenn and Marco to join her, knowing she could trust them. They agreed without hesitation, and Iris opened a suitcase containing an artifact, one of the only remaining clues left at the destroyed site. It was found among the few surviving items after the cult's warehouse had burned down, but they still needed someone who could figure out what it actually did. Meanwhile, somewhere nearby, a young girl named Sherry Barnett was walking down a corridor carrying a stack of books while reading one of them. Lost in her research, she bumped into someone, Sid, soaked in blood but oddly calm. He helped her up, and she looked at him with wide eyes, completely smitten by the mysterious boy who looked like he'd stepped out of a bloody battle. A man was running through the streets, scared out of his mind, but no matter how fast he ran, someone caught up to him, and before he could even scream for help, a cold blade touched his neck, and in the next moment, he was gone. The ones who killed him didn't say much, just repeated that they were from Shadow Garden and left like nothing ever happened. Later that day at the academy, Sid sat with his usual crew while eating, and as expected, they started teasing him about his so-called breakup with Princess Alexia. His friends kept laughing, saying nothing even happened, not even a single kiss, and while they joked around, Sid kept eating like he didn't care, because deep down, he really didn't. Soon, Skell brought up something new, saying he'd found a shop that sold strange things no one had ever seen in their world. He said there was this thing called chocolate, and it tasted like heaven. So naturally, he wanted everyone to check it out. Sid nodded along, but in his head, it wasn't about the fun or the food. He was more interested in why something like chocolate even existed here. Somewhere else, Princess Iris sat in her office with two bright students. She showed them an old artifact, one that had turned up after the Cult of Diablos mess. The girl, who had once bumped into Sid, looked at the item and said it still worked. Iris explained how little they knew about it and asked the girl to study it since she was a top student. The assistant principal backed the idea, saying this might open doors for her to travel across the world. Although the girl looked nervous, she agreed, and Iris assured her the Crimson Order would protect her. The second girl, watching quietly, said she wanted to help too, since she wanted answers about the ones who had attacked them. They simply told her to be careful and to promise she'd stay safe. Back in the capital, Sid and his friends finally reached the shop, but the line outside was insane, and the wait was at least 80 minutes. One friend started stressing about the time and warned them about the recent killings after dark. Skell just laughed it off, reminding them they were knights in training and said they'd be fine. As the line moved slowly, Sid looked around and noticed the building design felt strangely familiar, almost like the modern world he once knew. While standing in line, a girl walked up and asked Sid to come in for a survey. His friends tried to jump in too, but she insisted on just one person. She led Sid into the shop alone, and once inside, he saw something completely different. A proper, modern-looking store, clean and stylish, filled with things like coffee and chocolate, the kind of stuff that shouldn't even exist in this world. They went up to the top floor, and there stood Gamma looking proud. She told him the store was hers, something she had built using the knowledge he once casually shared. Back then, he had talked about chocolate and coffee like it was ancient lost knowledge from Shadow, and somehow Gamma had taken that small talk and built an empire. Sid looked at her and thought she might actually be the smartest among the Seven Shades, which was impressive, until she tried to walk down and tripped hard, falling face first with a nosebleed. He just watched quietly, thinking her brain worked better than her body. Still bleeding, Gamma smiled and offered him a seat that looked more like a throne. She showed him a glowing purple light coming out of a document, and everyone around seemed amazed. Gamma called it something beautiful, something that once saved her from pain and now inspired her. When Sid asked if the business was doing well, she casually said they'd expanded across nations and were now making over 1 billion zeni. Sid was quietly shocked, realizing she built all this from a few things he had said without even thinking. She then changed the subject, asking if he had come because of the recent killings. Sid didn't know what she meant, so Gamma explained that someone in the royal capital had been going around killing people and claiming to be part of Shadow Garden. She said their side was already investigating, but had found nothing. Sid, without hesitation, said he had a good guess who it might be, and promised to look into it himself. Gamma was stunned that he figured it out so quickly and praised him without holding back. On the way out, Sid met a girl named Nu, a new recruit for Shadow Garden. Gamma said Nu hadn't been with them for long, but even Alpha trusted her skills. Nu looked serious and promised to follow Sid's orders, and after a short moment, he told her she could leave. Nu smiled, saying it would be an honor to serve him. Then Sid told her he'd call her if he needed her again. Before leaving the shop, he turned back to Gamma and said he wanted to buy some chocolate, but only the cheapest one they had. Gamma, still looking proud, said she'd give him the best one they had, completely free, with a 100% discount. Sid casually swiped a coin while chatting with Gamma, keeping it smooth like nothing happened, just part of his usual shady charm. Meanwhile, Carmen held on to the chocolate and ran with his friend, both rushing like their lives depended on it, hoping to get back before curfew. Behind them, a few dumb guys were convinced Alexia was the killer, one of them rambling about how she must have snapped after getting rejected. As they sprinted through the streets, Sid suddenly stopped in his tracks after hearing the sharp ring of a sword being drawn. His friend, still running, called out to him, but Sid stayed frozen. He said he couldn't move another step because if he did, he might just explode from the stomach. His friend understood immediately, because when nature calls like that, it's game over. Sid told them to go without him, said he didn't want anyone to see him like this. They agreed, a little emotional even, promising they'd keep this moment a secret forever. Even Carmen got weirdly teary-eyed and told Sid he was making the right decision. So the group left, sniffling as they walked away, while Sid prepared to fight his own private battle. Meanwhile, the sound of the sword had come from Alexia. She was in her shadow persona, fighting off fake Shadow Garden goons. She sliced one of them down fast, but more kept coming. She tried to take them all at once, swinging hard, but her focus slipped, and one of the attackers got her from behind. She fell to her knees, bleeding and exhausted, and just when one guy raised his blade to finish her, he dropped dead. Shadow had arrived. Shadow walked in like he owned the place, told them they used the Shadow Garden name wrong, and for that, they'd have to die. The attackers lost it and started running, completely panicked. Some of them chased after Sid, but Alexia tried to stop Shadow, maybe to get answers, maybe just to yell, but before she could say anything, she collapsed. Shadow told her to stay out of it, disappeared in a blink, and popped up behind another guy, killed him instantly, and let him know escaping was never an option. Nu showed up just in time and praised Shadow for the clean work. She said she'd take it from here and get some answers out of the guy. Shadow gave a nod, told her not to mess it up, and walked away. Nu didn't waste time. She killed the guy herself, saying she wasn't as forgiving as Lord Shadow and didn't plan to spare anyone. Elsewhere, a few goons were talking about losing contact with Popat and the others. One of them joked that even the killer got smoked. Gaunt Knight didn't care. They had found the location of the item, and that was what mattered now. Later, Iris and Alexia were having a chat. Alexia's hand was bandaged, and she explained the attackers weren't really from Shadow Garden, but were just pretending. Iris nodded, saying Shadow himself told her that. She also mentioned meeting someone named Alpha from Shadow Garden on her way to the capital. According to the rumors, Shadow Garden was insanely strong, but nobody really knew anything else. Alexia guessed that the real enemy might be the Cult of Diablos, the same group Shadow seemed to be fighting. If that was true, maybe all of this was connected. Iris said it didn't really matter who the bigger enemy was. Both the Cult and Shadow Garden were messing things up, and neither of them would be allowed to go unchecked in the kingdom. The next day, Carmen and his friends were on the train, trying to act normal. Some students whispered that Carmen was the guy who pooped outside. He didn't react, just stared ahead. His friends, a little awkward, asked if he still had the chocolate. He said yes. When they got to school, they saw Scale awkwardly trying to confess to a girl with chocolate and a goofy look on his face. Everyone nearby started laughing, saying he had no idea who he was hitting on. The girl looked scary. Scale begged for backup, but no one helped. He and his buddy bailed before it got worse. Then Apu stepped up, saying he wouldn't mess up like Scale. This time, he'd done his homework. He knew the girl's favorite food, her schedule, even her route to school. Confident, he walked up to her, but the moment he spoke, she freaked out, yelling that his voice was the same as someone creepy she remembered. That didn't go well either. Back at his seat, Sid looked at his chocolate and figured he'd just give it to the next girl he saw. That turned out to be Sherry, who sat nearby, quietly reading. Without saying a word, Sid placed the chocolate on her desk and walked off. Sherry glanced up, recognized him from the day before, and kept thinking about him. Later, she sat in her room, holding the chocolate, wondering what made it special. Her grandfather walked in, coughing like usual, and noticed it. Sherry, caught off guard, said a girl gave it to her. Grandpa grinned and said if someone gave her chocolate like that, it probably meant love at first sight. Sherry remembered how she'd first met Sid. He asked if she was planning to talk to the person who gave it because he might be waiting for an answer. Sherry hesitated, not knowing how. Her grandpa gently reminded her that while studying and research were great, knowing how to talk to people was also part of life. He then asked if she'd made progress on the artificial core. Sherry said she'd just started. He said that was good, but then started coughing hard. Sherry looked worried, but he waved it off, saying he'd been feeling better lately, especially with a daughter like her by his side. She smiled, telling him that he made her lucky too, by choosing to adopt her. Grandpa told her that her mom had been a great researcher as well, and she could be just as brilliant. Sherry thanked him, and in that quiet little moment, both of them felt a bit lighter, a bit warmer inside. On a sunny day at Midgar Academy, Sherry Barnett felt so anxious that she couldn't even focus on her research. In the lab, guarded by Glenn and Marco, she kept thinking about her father's words about love at first sight. He wanted her to respond to the boy, waiting for her answer. She absent-mindedly ate the chocolate again. It was sweet, and so were her growing feelings for her admirer. Later, Nu disguised herself as a student and quietly met Sid. She reported that the man in black they caught had been brainwashed so badly that his mind was destroyed. This was a common thing with the cult's third children. Even after trying everything, Nu couldn't get any useful info from him. She said the cult's cloaks came from the black market, but while she talked, Sid was thinking about how Skell had signed him up for the Bushin Festival tournament without asking him. Annoyed, he punched Skell and Poe in the gut, both of whom faked being injured just for drama. Nu explained how the cult of Diablos had built a system over the years. She believed they were using their name to draw the real Shadow Garden out. Sid, distracted, told her not to do anything. She thought he meant not to interfere with the tournament, so she agreed. Then she mentioned a named first child called Rex had appeared in the capital. These named ones were rare. Despite being brainwashed, they kept their identity. Nu suspected something serious was going on. As she left, Sid thought this tournament could be the perfect stage to perform as a background character with flair. He said he needed time to think. Nu watched him walk away, admiring his so-called wisdom. She remembered her dark past, thankful that she now had a new purpose. The next day, Clare won her fight easily, pinning her opponent and earning praise from the crowd. Skell and Poe bet on the matches, but lost money again. Then they heard Sid was actually taking part in the tournament and were completely shocked. In the next round, Sid faced Rose Oriana, the best swordswoman at the academy and also a princess. He knew she was a named character and was excited for the match. He even said it was lucky to fight someone like her. As the match began, Sid purposely let her hit him so he could perform one of his made-up moves. Bloody Tornado. He coughed up fake blood and refused to go down, asking to keep fighting just to show off his remaining moves. Rose apologized for underestimating him and got serious, but before she could land a final blow, the referee stopped the match, declaring Rose the winner. Sid protested. He still had 33 techniques left, but got carried away on a stretcher, bandaged, and frustrated. After the match, Sherry approached Sid, unaware he didn't recognize her. She said his determination inspired her and handed him cookies she baked herself. Sid, assuming it was thanks for his dramatic performance, accepted them. Sherry introduced him to her father, Lutheran Barnett, assistant principal, a master swordsman, and a former Bushin champion. Sid realized Sherry wasn't just anyone. She was a named character too. Trying to avoid attention, he stayed polite and pretended he was fine, planning to rest at home to keep up the illusion of his injuries. That night, Sherry thought about Sid while eating chocolate. Curious about his past with Princess Alexia, she went to visit her. Alexia, recovering with coffee and pastries, welcomed her. At first, Alexia thought Sherry came to talk about schoolwork, but the mood changed when Sherry asked about her relationship with Sid. Alexia admitted it was fake, which made Sherry happy. She told Alexia that she and Sid were now friends. As Sherry left, Alexia smashed her coffee cup in frustration, but Sherry didn't notice and walked off with a smile. 5 days later, Sid returned to school. People were acting a little too nice. He heard there was a student council election, and many third years were busy elsewhere. Rose explained the election and noticed Sid had come back. But underground, something darker was happening. A cult leader known as the Gaunt Knight activated a red artifact that created a barrier around the academy. Only Sid noticed it, and when Alexia arrived, she saw the dead guard and locked gates. Back inside, Sid tested his magic and realized it wasn't working. None of the other students noticed anything strange. Suddenly, masked attackers stormed the classroom, claiming to be from Shadow Garden. Rose refused to back down and tried to fight them, but she couldn't use magic. Her sword broke, and she was about to be killed. Just when everyone thought hope was gone, Sid ran in and pushed Rose out of harm's way, taking the attack himself. He collapsed, blood covering his uniform. As terrorists attack the academy, Sid is secretly excited as they are fulfilling a terrorist takeover fantasy. Seeing that they are about to kill Rose, he jumps in front of the attackers. From his perspective, it is the role of a background character to be killed first in that scene. As blood gushes out and Rose is in shock, Sid grins, satisfied with the scene. A distraught Rose wonders why he gave his life away to save her. Remembering his drive to keep standing when he fought her and this recent sacrifice, Rose concludes he fell in love with her. Threatening Rose further, the terrorists then move all the students to the auditorium, leaving the dead Sid in the classroom. Finally alone, Sid starts pounding his heart until it begins beating again. Sid tells himself how lucky he was to be successful with his secret technique. The technique stops his heart for 10 minutes but maintains regular blood flow to his brain via magic. Although his magic is still obstructed, Sid circumvents the restriction once he narrows internal mana into threads. Donning his jacket to take his leave, Sid feels it would be rude to ignore the terrorists' magic-blocking scenario given their effort. At the Midgar Academy of Science, Rex breaks into Sherry's room and claims to be from Shadow Garden, but then wonders if their name was Shadow Guardian. He states that his job is simply to retrieve the artifact. Once they complete the mission, the cult permitted Rex to unleash unbridled carnage. Rex moves to take the artifact in Sherry's hands, but is stopped by Glenn. The fact that Glenn managed a countermove without magic compels Rex to acknowledge the feat. Glenn claims such is easy when his opponent is weak. While Glenn and Marco keep the terrorists busy, they let Sherry run away with the artifact. On a rooftop of the academy building, Sid observes the movement of the terrorists. He is quite excited about the whole situation. However, he is annoyed and disappointed that they all wear black at midday. He wears black robes at night. Predicting their formula, Sid decides to play out things slowly until nightfall, as he can make his grand appearances easier. Sid notices a pink-haired girl running around and almost begging to be captured. He realizes she is Sherry and snipes away any terrorists that move toward her. After enough close saves, Sid approaches Sherry and catches her before she trips down a stairwell. Before continuing their trek, Sid asks Sherry to remove her noisy slippers. Sherry finds the book she needs and explains that the artifact is called the Eye of Avarice. It absorbs and stores the magic from any user, but it can be programmed to ignore some magical frequencies. Sherry postulates that it cannot absorb magical traces that are too small or powerful spells exceeding its capacity. Once the artifact reaches maximum capacity, it will release all the stored energy. If it reaches a critical state, it will kill all the students in the auditorium. She further explains that the artifact she was researching is used to control the Eye of Avarice. Sherry plans on using the hidden backrooms to reach the auditorium safely. Once close, she will activate her artifact and stop the Eye of Avarice from exploding. In the auditorium, Rex reports to a tall, fully armored knight about the status of the Knight Order. The armored individual dismisses concerns, demanding Rex retrieve the artifact, threatening compulsory deception. Before he leaves, Rex informs the cult knight that some of their men have been killed by someone truly skilled, and he guesses that Shadow Garden is there. As Rex is walking with 4 of his men, Sid intercepted them. Thinking Sid's speed is from an artifact, Rex creates a net around himself, but Sid is already in the net and sends the named child flying. After being kicked into a classroom, Rex discovers the room is filled with the corpses of cultists. Rex realizes that this is beyond the powers of an artifact and starts panicking before Sid finishes him off. In another part of the school, New finds the deceased Glenn, noting how a prestigious knight was no match for the cult with their magic sealed away. She sees an unconscious Marco and prepares to kill him. A moment later, Sid surprises New with his arrival, looking for Sherry's tools. New explains that Marco was once her betrothed. After a quick deliberation, the two decided to leave him. New then reports that Shadow Garden has infiltrated the academy and awaits orders. However, most reinforcements will be unable to use magic, as their slime bodysuit will likely malfunction. The 7 Shadows would be the only members who could retain magic control in these circumstances. Out of the 7, only Gamma is in the capital, but this type of mission is not her forte. She will act as the rear commander. Outside the school, Princess Iris Midgar continues debating with the Knight Order commander over jurisdiction due to objections from the palace. After obtaining all the tools, New inquires why he needs them. Sid explains that the tools are to fine-tune an artifact that can counter and neutralize the Eye of Avarice, which is the reason for their magic suppression. New expressed awe for Sid's genius in identifying and remedying an artifact's effects. Sid promises the artifact's readiness by sundown, and New replies that their forces will be prepared. Once Sid is out of sight, New turns to the unconscious Marco to tell him he has been spared another day. As the Knights retain their jurisdiction and magic-deprived stalemate, Gamma and her Shadow Garden contingent stand atop the auditorium, ready for Sid's signal. Sid brings the tools to Sherry, and she starts fine-tuning the artifact, calling out for the assistance of her father. The entire academy had already been taken over, and all the students were trapped inside. Outside, the Knights waited around, still powerless since their magic hadn't returned yet. One of them mentioned that breaking the barrier from the outside was nearly impossible, and since even the special forces were stuck inside, there wasn't much they could do. Another pointed out how weird it was that all outside communication had been cut off, which made it seem like maybe someone inside the academy was working with the attackers. It was starting to look like there was a traitor among them. Inside, Rose looked around and noticed something. None of them were even tied up, and honestly, they didn't need to be. Without magic, nobody could fight back anyway, so ropes didn't matter. Still, she couldn't help but wonder, if they did have their magic, could they have fought their way out? Meanwhile, Sherry was working closely with Sid. They had been trying to figure out how the artifact worked. After a bit of work, she finally managed to activate it, and once it lit up, she felt a rush of excitement. Now, all she had to do was shut down the artifact that was blocking everyone's magic, and everything would go back to how it was supposed to be. Sid asked her about the tunnel, and Sherry answered like she had memorized her father's words. She walked over to the bookshelf, pressed one of the books, and a hidden path opened up behind it. Sid looked pleased. He had always loved secret places, but just before going in, Sherry started to hesitate. Her mind flashed back to a horrible memory, watching her mother get murdered right in front of her eyes. That image had never left her, and it hit her so hard that she didn't even notice the shadowy figure creeping up behind her. The scene shifted. Sherry now stood at her mother's grave, lost in thought. The assistant principal, Lutheran Barnett, walked up to her and reminded her that her mother hadn't just been a brilliant researcher, she had been his dear friend too. He had offered to take Sherry in, and she had accepted, not knowing how much love and care he would show her, more than even a real father might have. Now it was her turn, she believed. Her turn to continue her mother's work, and maybe, in doing that, save the man she had come to see as a father. Sid stayed calm and quietly told her he hoped her father would be safe. He said he'd done his part, but from here on out, it was her job to protect the world in her own way. Sherry nodded and said she'd try. Back in the auditorium, the Knights were getting restless. Rex still hadn't shown up, and it was starting to get suspicious. One student thought maybe they should attack, but Rose shut him down. Without magic, charging in would be suicide. And even if they got their magic back, that knight over there was giving off a terrifying amount of magical energy. Rose knew deep down, fighting him wouldn't be easy. even on their best day. Suddenly, gunfire echoed through the hall. The fake Shadow Garden terrorists had started shooting at the students, and the situation was getting worse by the second. The others looked at Rose, hoping she'd say something, but she just told them the truth. They couldn't do anything yet. If this went on much longer, the students would just get picked off one by one. Then Sherry arrived. The sight of injured students horrified her, and without wasting another second, she activated the artifact. The barrier vanished, and within moments, everyone felt it. Magic was back. Rose didn't wait. She lunged at the nearest enemy, shouting that their powers had returned. Now, it was chaos. Students began fighting back. The fake Shadow Garden soldiers got overwhelmed, and the auditorium turned into a battlefield. The science students rushed to help the wounded, dragging them to safety. Rose tried to go after the strong knight again, but more enemies got in her way. She paused. The thought hit her. Was this where her story ended? If she died here, would someone else pick up where she left off, just like she was carrying someone else's legacy now? Instead of fear, a strange smile crossed her face, and she braced herself to fight all of them if she had to. That's when he appeared, Shadow. He stepped forward, calm and sharp as ever, and gave Rose a nod of approval. He called her a strong and beautiful swordswoman, and then, one by one, the real members of Shadow Garden entered the auditorium. They moved like ghosts in the dark. Shadow introduced them, and each of them echoed the same words. They lived in the shadows, and they honored the shadow. Then they attacked. Someone yelled that now was the chance to move the wounded, and people started rushing to evacuate them from the auditorium. Meanwhile, Shadow noticed that the knight was already on the move, heading somewhere fast, but still not looking for her father. Then, chaos struck again. The entire school caught fire. Gamma saw the smoke and flames and realized the enemy had done something drastic. Burning down their own base? That was bold. It turned out the knight had started the fire himself, and without wasting time, he slipped away, leaving the burning academy behind. Elsewhere, 2 guards were still trying to figure out what was happening. One of them said they had gotten their magic back all of a sudden, and then, out of nowhere, the school was on fire. The bodies of the terrorists were burning now, and everything was falling apart. Iris finally arrived and found the hostel building completely empty. She ran into Rose and asked what had gone down. Rose explained that a mysterious group had shown up, killed all the terrorists, and called themselves Shadow Garden. Iris was stunned. Even more confusing, Rose added that the terrorists had also claimed to be Shadow Garden, so now nobody knew which group was real and which was fake. Gamma said they had recovered everything they needed. Only one thing remained. In the underground tunnel, fire had started spreading too. Sherry was running through it, dodging the flames, trying to find her father. At the same time, the knight had reached her father's office. He was already throwing books and papers around, setting everything on fire. Then guard appeared by the window. He looked at the knight and casually asked what he was doing, calling him Assistant Principal Lutheran Barnett. The knight took off his helmet, revealing the truth. It was Sherry's father. He looked at Sid and asked how he figured it out. Sid replied simply, he had known the moment he saw him. Lutheran smirked and said Sid had sharp eyes. And then Sid asked Luther why he had done all of this. Luther didn't dodge the question. He said he had once reached the peak of his career with all the best tools and resources in the world, but that was before Sid was even born. Carbon chimed in and mentioned how Luther had won some Bushin festival. Luther just brushed it off, saying the festival was nothing compared to what he really wanted, but he doubted anyone would understand his dreams. He went on. After reaching the top, he got sick. Everything he had worked for slowly slipped out of his hands, so he started searching for a cure, and that's when he came across the artifact. He met a researcher, Sherry's mother. She warned him not to use it. She wanted to hand it over to the government, so he killed her, just like that, and Sherry never found out. She spent her life studying the artifact, trying to complete her mother's research, never knowing that the killer she was trying to save was right beside her the whole time. Sid listened quietly. He didn't react much. He told Luther he had always drawn a line between the people who mattered to him and those who didn't. He never cared about careers, dreams, or friendships, so when he saw others lose them, it didn't really bother him. Luther asked if that meant Sid didn't care about that foolish woman or her daughter. But before the conversation could go further, Carbon stood up. He said they should begin the real fight before anyone interrupted. And so the fight started. Sid took heavy damage, and at one point Luther even threw Carbon out the window. He thought he had won and started to walk away. But then Shadow stepped forward and asked him, where was he going? He said he understood people like Luther. They both had lived their lives by the sword, and when someone like that stands in front of another, they can feel the power in each other. Sid looked straight at him and said it clearly. Luther was strong. Shadow started fighting Luther, and with each passing moment, a heavy wave of magic began to rise from him, not wild or out of control, but strong and steady, like someone finally waking up after a long sleep. He looked calm, like his body was finally back to full strength, and his power wasn't something normal humans could match anymore, not even close. He went straight at Luther with that energy, but Luther didn't flinch. He blocked the attack without even stepping back. That's when things got serious. Luther admitted he had to try harder, and when he did, the room shook. His full power exploded out, but somehow, Shadow didn't even get a scratch. Instead, the wall behind him broke into pieces, and Luther ended up hurt, confused by how easily the tables turned. Luther didn't back down. He went again, faster, angrier, but Shadow kept blocking everything without even moving much. Luther started losing it because it didn't make sense, and while he tried to keep up, he let it slip that he'd already set a plan in motion. Everything that happened that day would be blamed on Shadow Garden, and by the time it hit the newspapers, the whole world would treat Shadow as the enemy. But Shadow didn't care. He stood there, cool as ever, saying stuff like tricks and lies weren't going to stop them because their group was never trying to be good or evil in the first place. They followed their own path, didn't ask for approval, and didn't care who tried to stop them. If people wanted someone to blame for the world's mess, then fine. They could blame Shadow Garden all they wanted. It still wouldn't change anything. The mission would continue. Luther warned him again, trying to sound like he had the upper hand, saying the whole world might come for him, but Shadow was already done talking. He attacked, hard and fast, and this time, Luther couldn't keep up. Shadow beat him down brutally, one hit after another, until Luther had nothing left. Shadow grabbed him by the collar, calm but cold, and reminded him of how he'd killed Sherry's mother, probably in the same careless, cruel way. So now, Shadow was going to return the favor. And he did, breaking Luther's power, finishing him without mercy. Luther died right there. Not long after, Sherry arrived. She saw Shadow standing over her father's body, and her world fell apart. She rushed to her father, sobbing uncontrollably, her cries echoing through the quiet. Shadow didn't say much, just something vague about how it was better if she didn't know the full story. And then he was gone, just like that. The next morning, Alpha sat at a table, reading the front page of the newspaper. It had Shadow's face and name, marked as a criminal behind multiple kidnappings and mass killings. The world now believed he was the villain. Gamma stood beside her, calm and loyal as ever. No matter how the world saw them, they would keep doing what their leader wanted. Even if everyone hated them, it wouldn't matter. Beta agreed, saying everything was happening exactly how Shadow wanted. It was time to call in more members from the 7 Shadows. Meanwhile, Sid's school had been completely burned to the ground. The place was shut down, and the students were sent on summer break, just like that. Sid took it casually, like it was just another day, and mentioned they'd get a long break now. Before leaving town, Sherry came to meet Sid. She thanked him politely for everything he'd done, and Sid, being Sid, accepted it without making a big deal. She told him she was going abroad to study in Laos, a well-known place for research and science, and he agreed it was a good decision. She said there was something she had to do, something important that she couldn't achieve here, and besides, she had no reason left to stay. Sid asked her one last thing before she left, but she smiled and kept it to herself, climbing into her carriage without giving him an answer. As the wheels rolled away and the streets grew quiet again, Sherry sat inside, looking ahead with quiet determination. She had already decided in her heart she was going to finish what she had started. With nothing better to do at home and no plans in mind, Sid chose to stay in the dorms, but after lying around for a while, he realized that even there, boredom had followed him. Just when he started regretting his decision, a letter from Alpha showed up, letting him know about a place called Lindworm, and suddenly things didn't feel so dull anymore. While that was happening, Epsilon had already kicked off her day with her usual confidence. She was still proud of how she got slime magic after Shadow saved her back then, and even though others focused on the cult, she was busy perfecting her figure. With her slime magic, she added just the right curves to her chest, remembering how Sid once said she could change her destiny if she wanted to. Beta, on the other hand, had been writing a novel about Shadow's heroic rescue of a woman from Zenon Griffey, but ended up frustrated halfway through and stepped outside for some air. That's when she bumped into Epsilon, who casually mentioned that lately, Shadow had been sneaking a few glances her way, especially at her chest. Beta tried to stay calm, but Epsilon kept teasing, saying that only girls with real curves would understand those kinds of looks. Just when Beta started getting defensive, Nu showed up and gave them a quick update. A new mission had arrived from Alpha. Elsewhere, Iris and Alexia visited Gamma's store, prepping for Alexia's trip to the Sacred Land for the goddess's trial. Alexia wanted to use the opportunity to meet with the Archbishop and look into rumors about corruption and missing children. Gamma, calling herself Luna during business hours, welcomed them in. Alexia hinted at needing a gift, but not really a gift, and not for someone specific either. Gamma picked up on the vibe and showed her some panties and thongs. Iris was clearly not into it, but Alexia loved them, confident they would suit her perfectly. She tried them on and eventually talked Iris into letting her buy them. Meanwhile, after the whole terrorist incident, Rose had heard that Sid somehow survived, and without wasting a second, she ran to find him. When she did, he was wrapped in bandages, barely moving, but she didn't care. In her mind, only love could have given him the strength to survive something like that. And so she decided then and there that she would give him her heart. A few days later, they were on a train together heading toward the Sacred Land, with Rose clinging to his arm. Sid was regretting his decision to travel like a background character, thinking he could have just sprinted there faster. Rose assumed he was there for the goddess's trial, and though Sid had no clue what she was talking about, he guessed Alpha probably sent him for that. Rose explained that the winner might even get to marry a princess, and if Sid succeeded, she'd speak to her father about the brave man who saved her life. She believed in their future, while Sid, in his head, thought she was trying to convert him into her faith, completely missing the romantic part. When they arrived in Lindworm, Sid noticed some weird souvenirs, keychains showing a sword stabbing a demonic left arm. Rose explained that a hero named Olivier had once chopped off the demon Diablo's left arm in that region, and somewhere nearby, in a place called the Sanctuary, that arm was still sealed. As they walked, Rose spotted a signing event and pulled Sid along, excited to meet the famous author Natsumi. Sid took a quick glance at the books, titles like Romeo et Julieta, Dragon Bowl, and Star It's a Trap Wars, and immediately realized that they were all shameless rip-offs. He figured someone else must have been reincarnated like him and wanted to find out who. To his surprise, the author was none other than Beta, who had used the stories he told her to become famous. He remembered how she once said she loved literature, and he thought she'd just use his stories for inspiration, not full-on copy-paste. Beta gave him a signed book, claiming it had mission details, and Rose proudly showed off her copy too. When she saw Sid's signature was in some old, ancient script, she was curious, but Sid just brushed it off, saying it looked cooler that way. Meanwhile, Alpha was standing over the body of Archbishop Drake, confused about what he had been hiding that made even the cult take him out. On the rooftops, Sid spotted a suspicious man running and stopped him instantly. The guy attacked, but Sid blocked it like it was nothing. Epsilon then showed up and took care of him, explaining that the guy was a target eliminated by the cult's own executioner. They had captured his allies, but the main assassin had already gone into hiding, so now they were switching to Plan B. Sid simply told her he'd be following his own path from here. At a Mitsugoshi hotel in Lindworm, Sid was relaxing in the hot springs, thinking about the few things he actually enjoyed in life, hot water and peace being two of them. Just as he was getting comfortable, Alexia suddenly appeared. At first, she was flustered seeing him there, but calmed down when she noticed he wasn't even looking at her. She took the chance to apologize for slashing him during the earlier chaos. Sid, meanwhile, was quietly wondering what she was doing in Lindworm. Alexia explained that she was invited as a special guest for the goddess's trial. When she asked why he was there, he said a friend told him there was some fun event happening, so he figured that must be it. As they soaked in the water, she went on about the goddess trial, how it was an annual ritual where ancient warriors were summoned to fight modern challengers. Hundreds would try each year, but only a handful actually got a chance to fight. She mentioned how a swordsman named Venom once summoned the legendary Olivier, but still lost. She wasn't there to fight, though. She came to investigate the Archbishop's murder, but the church had cut her off from looking deeper. Trying to flirt a little, she hinted that the information was classified, and maybe if Sid joined the Crimson Knights, she'd tell him more. Sid wasn't interested. Expecting him to sneak a few glances at her, she posed a little, but got annoyed when he didn't even look. He simply explained that at hot springs, he avoided staring so everyone could relax, though he did ask her to stop peeking at his Excalibur. Alexia called it a worm, but when Sid stood up and declared that she shouldn't judge before seeing the full weapon, she froze. He then wrapped a towel around himself, slapped his side like he was drawing a blade, and declared that once unsheathed, the holy sword sets off on a quest. Alexia sat there dumbfounded as he left, and she awkwardly stood up, trying to mimic the towel trick. The next day, the new acting Archbishop, Jack Nelson, canceled Alexia's audit, saying the church would handle the murder internally. Alexia was furious, knowing they'd destroy all the evidence before she got approval from the king. At Lindworm's Colosseum, the goddess's trial kicked off. Rose and Alexia were seated next to Beta, who was acting as her author persona, Natsume Kafka. Alexia was already annoyed by how popular Natsume was, convinced people like her were rotten inside. On the other hand, Beta was secretly judging Alexia for using Sid and thought she was no better. When Beta waved to the crowd with a smug smile, Alexia smiled back and stomped on her foot without breaking expression, and just like that, a petty rivalry started. With the crowd hyped, Nelson activated the arena barrier and the matches began. The first fighter, Tapa Beatatrix, stepped up but failed to summon anyone. The next one failed too. Behind Sid, two guys explained how no one could leave the arena unless the fight ended, and while the prize was nice, getting killed was a real risk. Still, the winner got a medal that could get them into any knight order around the world. Sid started getting excited, wanting to show off his shadow, but also realized doing so could blow his cover. Challenger after challenger failed. Even Steel Ain't Happenin' from the Laugus Vigilante Corps got nothing. Sid thought maybe he could sneak in, pretend to be weak, and still win. Elsewhere, Shadow Garden was already scattered across the city, surveying and preparing for their mission. At sunset, Alpha met with Epsilon. They were ready. By nightfall, Sid was growing bored again. Only one person had managed to summon anyone, Anarose. Then the announcer called out a new name, Sid Kaganu from Midgar Academy. Sid zoned out at first, thinking it sounded like a side character, until he realized it was actually him. While Rose had submitted his name to show the world his worth, Sid now had a problem. If he refused, the Academy might expel him, and his sister would probably scold him for days. So, he picked a third option. Instead of walking out as Sid, he created a blinding flash in the sky and dropped into the arena as Shadow. Everyone's attention shifted instantly. Nelson was preparing to capture him when the ground responded, opening a door. A mysterious woman walked out behind Shadow. Nelson panicked since he hadn't summoned anyone, but Beta, as Natsume, recognized her as Aurora, the Witch of Calamity. Not much was known about her, except for the destruction she left behind. Nelson claimed Shadow was unlucky, summoning the strongest witch in history, but Alexia saw it differently. If the sanctuary gave him Aurora, then Shadow's power must be unreal. The two began to fight, smiling the entire time. Aurora danced lightly, launching blood spears at him, but Shadow kept dodging, calm and collected. The audience was stunned. Nelson insisted Shadow was losing, but Natsume pointed out Aurora hadn't even landed a hit. Alexia agreed, impressed that Shadow was still analyzing her moves mid-fight. Shadow realized she wasn't fighting at full power, which was a shame because she was the best opponent he'd had in ages. With one clean strike, he ended the match. Aurora smiled as she faded into light. As the red glow from the sanctuary door spread across Lindworm like someone had cracked open Hell's front gate, Sid stood on the dam, feeling pretty good about himself. His plan had worked. Shadow made the headlines while plain old Sid Kaganu was just background noise again. He figured he'd hit up a hot spring next and chill for a bit, but of course the universe wasn't done messing with him. A magic door floated up beside him, literally on the water. Sid saw it, sighed like someone who knew the drill, and walked straight in. Back at the arena, everyone was losing their minds over the new door that popped up mid-stage. Nelson tried to play it smart, saying the sanctuary only opened for the worthy, and no, it wasn't some regular door. They could move, change shape, and pop up wherever they wanted. He babbled something about 3 types of doors: forbidding, beckoning, and welcoming. But honestly, no one really cared. Then Shadow Garden stepped in like they owned the place. Alpha told Alexia and Rose to stay put. but that clearly wasn't happening. Epsilon handled the guards like they were made of paper and dragged the Archbishop into the sanctuary. Chi and Omega grabbed Ms. Natsume, aka Beta in disguise, as a pretend hostage. Alexia was tempted to leave Beta behind, especially after one side-eye at her slime upgrades, but eventually followed. Epsilon had her own problems. Venom, Nelson's guard dog, came in swinging. His blade cut her enhancements. Furious, Epsilon patched them back in seconds and then knocked him out cold faster than anyone could blink. Nelson swore he didn't see a thing, and Epsilon made sure he kept it that way. She snatched him by the face and dove through the door, with the girls jumping in right behind. Inside the sanctuary, Rose and Alexia crash-landed right on top of Beta. Alexia pretended she tripped, but no one cared. Alpha wasn't here to babysit. She got straight to the point. This place wasn't some tourist trap. It was where the left arm of Diablo's had been sealed after Olivier sliced it off. Turns out, the legendary hero Olivier wasn't some buff guy with a sword. She was a battle-hardened elf woman, and surprise, surprise, she looked just like Alpha. Nelson started panicking, rambling about how Olivier should have been dead, but Alpha shut him up quick. They already knew the cult's secrets. The door lit up again, and Olivier's memory appeared, standing tall like some forgotten guardian. Somewhere else in this weird magical maze, Sid found himself in a blank white void. Again. This time, Aurora was there. She wasn't sure how he got in, but she was happy to see him. She didn't remember much, only that their fight was fun and he was probably the strongest person in her memories. Sid explained that the door found him, chased him a bit, and then he gave up and walked in. Aurora said she didn't even know if there was a way out. She was just there, stuck in time, in a straitjacket no less. Sid helped her out of it and agreed to team up. If they wanted to leave, they had to go to the sanctuary's core and destroy its magical heart. No magic allowed here though. It just gets eaten by the place. Sid didn't mind. Breaking things was kind of his specialty. Aurora smiled, saying he was her gallant knight. If they escaped, she'd vanish. But for now, she was just happy to tag along. Back with Alpha's crew, they wandered through memory layers and ended up in what looked like a high-tech lab. It was all part of Olivier's memories. The cult used to kidnap orphans, run awful experiments, and most of the kids didn't survive. Olivier was one of the unlucky few who did. Alpha explained the fairy tale about Olivier saving the world was a lie. She wasn't sent to stop the demon, she was told to collect more pieces of it. She went along with it, thinking it would bring peace. Meanwhile, the cult was just growing more powerful behind her back. On the next memory shift, they arrived at the silo that held the demon's severed left arm. Alpha revealed the cult used that arm to create red pills. Yes, the same ones Zenon had used. They made people strong, even immortal, but came with nasty side effects. Nelson tried to deny it all, but Alpha pulled out the receipts. Turns out, Nelson was one of the cult's elite, the 11th of the rounds. He had been popping those pills for years. Alexia pointed out he used to have hair in the memories, and he snapped back, blaming stress and idiots, not the drugs. Alpha exposed the pills' two big flaws. They had to be taken every year or wore off, and they could only make 12 per year. Not so coincidentally, the cult's top brass had 12 seats. The math was mathing. The cult had been secretly testing Olivier's descendants, trying to perfect the pills, using Diablo's arm like a twisted factory. Nelson finally snapped and admitted everything. He called himself Nelson the Avaricious, pumped himself full of magic, and got ready to fight. But Delta had already had enough. She stabbed him from behind like it was nothing and tossed him into the water. Epsilon scolded her for not waiting till after intel gathering, and Alpha reminded her once again, always make sure the prey is dead. Spoiler, it wasn't. Nelson crawled out of the water all mutated and monstrous, grinning like a maniac. He broke the memory layer, hijacked the sanctuary's defense system, and warped everyone, Alpha, Delta, Beta, and the princesses, into a blank white space. At the same time, Epsilon's squad got dropped somewhere else. Nelson started multiplying himself, ready for revenge, but Delta just grinned. For her, this was turning into a great day. The Shadow Garden was gathered, and Beta delivered her report saying the cult of Diablos had gone completely silent around Midgar Academy since the Bushin Festival ended. Even the petty troublemakers had vanished. and Fenrir's reconstruction was stalled because no one seemed to know what was going on. Sigma said the plan was on track, so they could start focusing elsewhere, but others mentioned hearing that a flood of money was moving into the lawless city. Beta explained this was a lawless pit that belonged to no one, always bred trouble, and when things went bad there, the mess spilled into neighboring countries. She suggested dropping other plans for now and sending people in before it got worse. Shadow listened, decided to handle it himself, and didn't blink when Beta asked if he was going alone. The others said they trusted him, but losing him would be a serious problem. He brushed them off, saying it was just the red moon, nothing worth panicking over. Alpha smirked, saying even the red moon's legend wouldn't make him flinch. When he asked if they found it beautiful, they admitted they did, then wished him luck, fully expecting him to come back victorious. Meanwhile, a group who had met Shadow during the Bushin festival went straight into trouble by heading for the Crimson Tower, home of the Blood Queen, one of Lawless City's 3 rulers. Locals whispered that she was a vampire and usually stayed the hell away from her territory, but these geniuses walked right in. At the gate, a one-armed man told them only the Queen's people, guests, or strong fighters could pass. They bragged about being strong, but he laughed at their stupidity, saying he once challenged the Queen, lost an arm, and got stuck here like a ghost. They realized he was the infamous White Devil with a massive bounty, but he said he was now just the doorman who enjoyed roughing up intruders. They fought, but no one saw how it ended. Elsewhere, Sid, using his alias, was dragged through the city by his sister, who said she was going to a Dark Knight organization meeting. He pointed out that it wasn't even a real thing, but she explained it was an unofficial group. He thought back to how becoming Shadow had landed him in one ridiculous situation after another, like the time his sister won a festival contest and celebrated by forcing him to dress as a girl for a fancy dinner. She claimed she was shaping his future and promised that if he followed her lead, she'd get him a spot as a knight in Midgar. He suspected she just wanted him stuck in a safe government desk job. They passed a shop selling rare beasts, and the seller showed off a little Goldie worth 30 million, which Sid recognized as the beast he'd flattened during the festival. Another, worth 37 million, also rang a bell, but his sister wasn't interested and dragged him off. Later, Sid wandered alone, and when a man bumped into him and swiped his wallet, he casually took it back along with the thief's own wallet. A few more idiots tried their luck, but he cleaned them out too, and by nightfall, his pockets were heavy. Then he spotted a group in an alley kicking around a beast, saying the Blood Queen's pets were dangerous, though here they were used like punching bags. That was when strange magic began to seep from the blood-red moon. Sid saw the strange scene and wondered what it was. Then the focus shifted to other people nearby. A round creature stood up and attacked someone, turning them into a ghoul, and soon both were fighting each other. Watching this, Sid thought it might have grown so strong because of the magic spilling from the red moon. He considered whether to stay on the sidelines like a background extra or take the rare chance to kill them while they were distracted. But before he could act, a girl appeared, killed the ghoul instantly, and ended up saving him. She introduced herself as Mary, an ancient vampire hunter, and warned him to run because the red moon had begun its madness and time was short before walking away. Her words left Sid feeling strangely excited. Elsewhere, Clare noticed Sid was missing from his room, then saw a man being chased by a ghoul. She killed the ghoul with a single kick, asked the man if he had seen Sid, and when he said no, she left, wondering where he had gone. Sid, meanwhile, ended up at a place where people paid for private entertainment, but before anything could happen, ghouls burst in and attacked, sending screams through the building. One of the women there found herself in a bad state, but before a ghoul could reach her, Shadow appeared, killed it, and repeated Mary's earlier warning to run while there was still time before leaving. Another girl entered, asking if Mary was all right, then wanted to know what had happened. Mary told her a man named Shadow had been there, and the girl explained she did not know him personally, but considered him one of the most dangerous people in the city, responsible for a killing. Mary admitted she was surprised by his reputation, then began packing and said she was leaving, ignoring the girl's protest about the danger it might cause her. In another part of the city, a woman sat above the streets watching people flee, remarking that only luck could save them, and luck never lasted forever. Some boys reported to her that vampires had sent ghouls into the city, and she stood up to act. Later, Clare was shown crying over what she believed was Sid's body when Mary arrived, saying she had found him earlier and confirming he was dead. Clare asked where she had seen her brother, and Mary explained that when the moon turned red, he had been laughing at the sight. Clare insisted that was impossible since her brother was a coward who would have been screaming instead. Mary said she had seen someone like him taken by followers of the Blood Queen to the Crimson Tower. She explained that the vampires intended to sacrifice him to awaken Elizabeth from her 1,000-year sleep, needing a young living boy for the ritual. When Clare asked if they meant to awaken her now, Mary revealed they had waited thousands of years for this night, when the red moon would rise and give vampires dangerous power, and even if the queen was still asleep, the red moon would surely wake her. Then ghouls suddenly broke in to attack them. Mary told Clare, "Your brother should still be alive in the tower because they need a living boy. My target is Elizabeth. I'm preparing to find her. Come with me. We'll work together." Clare agreed, and together they killed the ghouls. After this, they headed toward the tower. Skell and Poe were running from a swarm of ghouls when Skell tripped, and Poe didn't even look back, leaving him to fend for himself. A ghoul closed in on Skell, ready to tear into him. Meanwhile, a man named Juggernaut arrived, amused at the chaos, and remarked that the last time he had seen such a scene was during the Great Drop invasion. Elsewhere, knights who were supposed to protect the city were instead fleeing in panic. In one office, however, a young woman stayed at her post until she learned that ghouls had breached even the main city district. Moments later, several of them stormed into her office, but Shadow appeared, cut them down, and saved her life. He warned her to run while she still could, saying time was short. She asked who he was, but before he could speak, another knight told her he was a wanted criminal. Shadow simply added that the red moon was rising and time was running out. Far away, the vampires were making their move. One of Crimson's allies informed him that the preparations for the ritual were complete, and the city was almost fully under their control, though a few troublemakers were slowing things down. Crimson said he knew exactly who they were, fools clinging to worthless ideals, and named two of them, Yukimi, the Spirit Fox, ruler of the White Tower, and Juggernaut, ruler of the Black Tower. He suggested they go play a game with them, certain it would frustrate them. The ally then mentioned another person killing ghouls in the city, which caught Crimson's attention, as this stranger was none other than Shadow. Back in the streets, Yukime and Juggernaut were cutting down ghouls with ease, but when their eyes met, the ghouls stopped being their main concern, and the fight turned personal. There was no mistaking the hostility between them. High above, Shadow watched their clash and thought about how nothing had changed. They might push the story forward, but he would stick to his role and keep becoming Shadow. With that, he leapt into the middle of their fight, drawing both their attention. They demanded to know who he was, and he introduced himself as Shadow, a figure who lived in the darkness and hunted the darkness. The White Devil was known for killing a lot of people, and openly admitting he enjoyed it, having spent his whole life doing just that until one day when Crimson Lord showed up and cut off his arm. Back in the present, the White Devil talked about having another chance to kill again, but suddenly Jagannath appeared, taking down a bunch of ghouls with ease. The White Devil realized this was Jagannath the Tyrant, ruler of the Black Tower and a seriously powerful guy, and then noticed Yukimi, ruler of the White Tower, who was strong too. Jagannath and Yukimi started fighting each other, and the White Devil wondered how he could even think of attacking either of them. Out of nowhere, Shadow showed up between them and introduced himself. Yukimi recognized Shadow as the Dawn, who held influence over the Midgar royal capital, and Jagannath knew him too, but didn't care much. Then Jagannath smashed the Crimson Tower gate with his sword and started to leave. Shadow warned that time was running out, the moon was red, and chaos had begun. Yukimi asked if he meant the ghoul situation, and Jagannath confirmed, saying the Red Moon legend said 3 kingdoms would fall when it showed up before leaving. Yukime told Shadow maybe they could be allies since he helped her side, then she left too. The White Devil was shocked at how easily Jagannath broke an important artifact, and figured both Yukime and Jagannath wanted to take down the Blood Queen, who was really powerful. He looked at Shadow, but sensed no power, assuming he was weak, so he attacked. But Shadow sliced him apart before he could react, leaving the White Devil stunned and unable to believe what happened. Shadow repeated that time was short and the frenzy had started before disappearing. Meanwhile, Beta was reading an old book about how centuries ago, the technology here had been super advanced and powered by demons. She wondered how people figured out they could tap into that power. At the same time, Clare and Mary entered the tower searching for Sid. Beta confronted them, saying she had orders to kill intruders but didn't want to fight Clare, recognizing her as the recent Bush and Festival champ. Mary noticed Beta didn't seem like a vampire and suggested avoiding unnecessary fights since Beta's backup was upstairs with Rose Rihanna. Clare asked who Beta was, and she said she was part of Shadow Garden. Clare accused them of destroying her school and asked if they planned to destroy the tower too, but Beta denied that, saying she was just researching possessed people and needed blood samples from progenitor vampires. Mary questioned what progenitor vampires had to do with it, and Beta explained that vampires and possessed came from the same origin but had split into different bloodlines over time, so they needed to study the Blood Queen, a true vampire. Mary refused to agree, calling it wrong, but Beta told her not to get involved, promising they wouldn't interfere with Mary either. Clare asked if there was a cure for the possessed, but Beta told her not to worry about that. Clare decided to leave, focusing on rescuing her brother before he was sacrificed. Rose overheard this and got upset, but Beta told her to keep quiet. Clare and Mary started to leave, and Beta asked Mary if she planned to turn the place into some kind of heaven again, but Mary ignored the question. Later, Clare asked Mary about it too, but Mary stayed silent. Beta told Rose their mission was only to get the blood sample. Lord Shadow would handle the Blood Queen and stop any sacrifices. Meanwhile, Clare and Mary were busy killing vampires by targeting their hearts, as Mary explained that was the only way to truly defeat them. Clare accused Mary of hiding something and acting weird around Beta, almost like she was siding with vampires. Mary said her real goal was to kill the Blood Queen, which she'd been working on for years. Clare asked about the heaven comment, wondering how Beta knew about a rumor that was 1,000 years old. Mary said that once possessed, there was no going back to being human, so some secrets were better left unspoken. Suddenly, they felt a huge, magical presence. It was Jagannath, killing powerful vampires and demanding to know where the Blood Queen was. Clare and Mary tried to hide, but he found them quickly. He punched Clare so hard she crashed through the floor, then slashed Mary with his sword, knocking her back while mocking them for being weaker than he expected. Clare surprised Jagannath by striking at his legs, which caught him off guard since no one had ever survived his punch before, but she did. He swung his sword again, but Clare dodged back to Mary, who was badly hurt. Mary told Clare she couldn't heal herself and needed Clare's blood instead, so she bit Clare's neck, drawing blood and making Clare blush from the embarrassment. Mary's wounds healed instantly, and she powered up, launching fierce attacks at Jagannath, who dodged easily, admitting she was stronger now but still not as strong as him. Then he slammed the ground, kicking up dust everywhere, and in the chaos, he appeared behind Clare ready to strike, making her realize she might die and silently asking Sid for forgiveness in her mind. Suddenly, Shadow showed up, standing on Jagannath's sword, spun around, and kicked him hard enough to knock him off the tower. Jagannath angrily demanded to know what Shadow had done, which surprised Clare and Mary, who looked toward Shadow. Shadow told them the battle had begun and time was running out, then left. Mary mentioned that the church considered Shadow an enemy, and Clare wondered if he had come to save them. Mary apologized for taking Clare's blood, but Clare said it was okay, and admitted she now knew Mary was a vampire. Mary agreed and began explaining her true identity and the Blood Queen's story. Mary said that thousands of years ago, vampires ruled by hunting and feeding on humans like it was a game, but as humans learned their weaknesses, they started killing vampires until their kind almost vanished. During that time, the Blood Queen lived peacefully among humans as a ruler and stopped drinking blood, and her followers did the same. They lost their powers, but gained the ability to walk in sunlight, ending their bloodlust and living alongside humans. However, the queen struggled because the more she avoided blood, the thirstier she became, and sunlight burned her painfully. Still, she wanted to create a heaven where humans and vampires could live happily together, and for a while, it felt like heaven. Then, the red moon appeared, which comes once every 1,000 years, giving vampires extreme power. The queen couldn't satisfy her thirst, so the Crimson Lord gave her a drop of blood, but she lost control and went mad, killing people non-stop for 3 days and nights. That paradise vanished, and the 3 kingdoms suffered badly. Mary survived by drinking from those who died, and later met the queen, who admitted she made a terrible mistake and asked Mary to throw her body into the ocean to prevent her from rising again. The queen stabbed herself in the heart, and while an ordinary vampire would have turned to ash instantly, the queen's body didn't, though her breathing stopped. Mary said she couldn't refuse the queen's order, but also couldn't complete it fully, calling that her biggest mistake. Then the Crimson Lord and his followers attacked Mary and took the queen's body, but spared Mary, telling her he hoped she would join them on the next red moon thousands of years later. Mary now said the Crimson Lord wanted the queen to do things against her will and wondered how the queen could ever forgive her. Hearing this, Clare admitted she wasn't much better and suspected she might also be possessed. As a child, Clare noticed strange things in herself and feared becoming a monster, so she wanted her brother to achieve something before that happened, which is why she brought him here. But because of her, he got kidnapped, and she didn't know how to apologize. Clare asked if Mary was sure about the Jisen she mentioned and whether she could bring him back, but Mary said no, she didn't want to repeat the past and believed the queen wanted to die. Clare said she wouldn't know until she talked to the queen and didn't want to believe Mary's actions were a mistake, since thinking that was painful. She suggested they go together to the Crimson Lords group to take back the queen, and Mary happily agreed, promising to help rescue Clare's brother. Clare said she would handle her own mission, and Mary agreed to focus on hers. Later, Shadow entered the vampire's treasury and thought he might have seen his sister recently, but decided to trust she could handle herself. He started gathering valuable items, thinking they were expensive, and used his slimes to collect all the treasure. He joked about living 300 years and that this wasn't nearly enough money, knowing a boss fight was coming and considering changing his style since his old ways were outdated. Shadow learned the vampire boss was very powerful and rare and planned to make a flashy entrance. In another scene, the Crimson Lord removed the queen's heart and declared his intent to stain the world with blood again, hanging the heart inside a suspended body while waiting for the queen to revive. Suddenly, Shadow appeared behind him in atomic form and attacked, causing a massive blast that looked like the Crimson Lord didn't survive. Shadow then said the Moonred Fringe had begun and that there was very little time left. The tower shown before was completely wrecked thanks to Shadow's attack, and the Crimson Lord was finished too. Shadow thought the final boss would be waiting there, but they weren't anywhere to be found, making him wonder if this was one of those battles focused on group fights without a big boss. Still, he decided to check underground, saying if he didn't find anything there either, he'd just gather the leftover gold coins and call it a day before leaving. After Shadow left, Clare and Mary showed up searching for Sid and Queen Elizabeth. Mary couldn't sense any sign of the Crimson Lord and worried they might have already sacrificed Sid, wondering what exactly had happened. Suddenly, Clare got attacked by a weird plant, badly hurt, and knocked out cold. Then, a person emerged from the plant, shocking Mary, who realized it was Queen Elizabeth herself. Queen Elizabeth called Clare over, bit her neck, and started sucking her blood, but just then, Shadow Garden arrived. Beta attacked the queen and managed to rescue Clare, stabbing a blade into the queen's head and causing a huge explosion. They pulled Clare to safety, and Beta checked on her, while another elf confirmed Clare was breathing but badly needed emergency care. Beta knew they couldn't retreat yet, since Shadow hadn't arrived and was probably busy elsewhere, trusting them to handle things, especially since their lord's sister was dying. Beta vowed to finish the fight quickly. Beta ordered number 664 to take care of Clare, while numbers 665 and 6666 provided cover fire. Beta attacked the queen, but the queen dodged effortlessly. The other elves tried too, but the queen blocked every attack and even immobilized them. Beta jumped in, cutting the queen's hand and tossing an explosion to knock her back. Mary watched and admitted that despite Beta's strength, defeating the queen wouldn't be easy since she'd been slow to wake but was dangerous. Suddenly, the queen's magical energy surged, and Beta noted it was even stronger than Lady Alpha's. Yukimi arrived, calling the queen a monster and saying she'd have to fight her. Then, Jagannath showed up, joking about being left out, but when he punched the queen, it barely fazed her. Instead, she flung him against a wall, seriously hurting him, while Yukimi mocked him from the sidelines. The queen fully woke up and attacked everyone. Beta tried to shield them with her slime, but the queen's attack was too strong and broke through. Afterward, Jagannath was in bad shape with a broken leg, while Yukimi managed to protect herself. Mary checked on Beta, who insisted she was fine, and the other elves formed a shield around Clare. Beta explained that the queen had used a ton of magic, but wasn't tired yet because she was using their own magic to heal and get stronger. She told Rose Rihanna to take Clare away, but Rose refused, wanting to keep fighting. Beta insisted that Rose had other duties. As Beta prepared to strike again, the queen damaged her hand, and Beta noticed her hand was turning into possessed flesh, just like when she joined Shadow Garden. She saw the same happening to others and realized the queen was controlling demon blood, somehow negating Shadow's blessing. Clare's possessed flesh started spreading fast. and Beta tried to save her, but was too late. A burst of magical energy erupted, and Clare woke up lying on a sheep. A person named Aurora told her she was awake, explaining that Clare had been anxious, thinking she was poisoned, but she had actually been cured a long time ago. Clare wanted to know if her possession was gone and who had helped her. Aurora said it was someone Clare already knew well, but Clare denied it. Aurora tried to explain about evolution and blood types, but Clare cut her off, wanting to skip the science and just know what was happening now. Aurora said Clare's blood was out of control, and then a bell rang, signaling time was up. Clare begged for more time to understand, noticing her hand glowing. Aurora said that glow was meant to help Clare learn to control her powers, but told her there was no time left as things were spiraling out of control. Clare demanded to know who Aurora was and why she was helping her. Aurora explained that her name was Aurora, and that she was helping because Clare belonged to Shadow. Suddenly, Clare found herself back at the tower where Aurora took her place. Beta questioned how Aurora was there and asked about Clare's whereabouts. Aurora explained that her current appearance was just like what Shadow and Beta had done, and since she was used to this body, she had changed her form. Then, she challenged the Queen, ready to test how much she could handle. The Queen attacked, but Aurora confidently countered, saying she was the original, taking control of the Queen's blood attack, redirecting it, and slicing the Queen with ease. Aurora remarked how easy it had been. The Queen wasn't down yet, and launched another attack, which Aurora met head-on, and their intense battle left Jagannath and Yukime stunned as they watched the Queen get severely injured. Aurora announced she would show them the world's most powerful move next, preparing to use Shadow's signature almighty range, Strike. Beta warned her not to do it, but Aurora didn't stop. As she started the attack, she suddenly got hurt and had to stop halfway, muttering that the body couldn't handle it. Beta scolded her for damaging Clare's body, but Aurora brushed it off, saying a small wound like that would heal on its own. Meanwhile, the Queen recovered and got ready to fight again. Beta panicked, but Aurora reassured her, saying her job here was done and she was just buying time for Shadow to arrive. Then Shadow made a grand entrance, his gold coins shining as he declared the time of awakening had come. The Queen attacked, and Shadow blocked and countered, but she shattered some of his coins. Beta was baffled, wondering why Shadow was letting her hit him since he could have ended it instantly. When an attack targeted Beta, Shadow saved her and the others one by one, making Beta realize he was protecting them because they were helpless. Shadow declared he wouldn't lose anyone, and Beta swooned over his pure heart, confident he would save them. However, it soon became clear Shadow cared more about his coins, snapping when one broke and refusing to lose any more. Enraged, he teleported to the Queen, drew his sword, and the battle exploded into a blinding clash. Jagannath wondered what Shadow was doing, while Yukime smirked, admitting he was full of surprises. Shadow taunted the Queen about the game lasting too long, and when she asked his name, Mary screamed the Queen's name below, realizing Shadow was about to deliver the final blow. Shadow declared himself Recover Atomic, and instantly, vampires in the town turned back into humans as the red moon disappeared. Elsewhere, Beta stood beside a healed Clare, distraught as her possessed arm disappeared. Rose whispered about heaven being where loved ones reunite before leaving with her allies. Mary sat beside the defeated Queen, while Jagannath grinned and promised to fight Shadow Garden someday for fun. Sid's friend lamented failing his dreams, and another joked they at least survived. At the station, Sid ate peacefully as Clare and Mary hugged goodbye. Sid reflected that ghouls, vampires, and possessed were all cured of magic overload, but not their emotions. Clare flexed her tingling left arm, feeling it had special powers and was pulling her somewhere. Sid reassured her she would figure it out and promised to always have her back, making Clare squeeze his hand in gratitude. As they walked, Clare asked if he knew who Shadow really was. Sid remembered Shadow as the guy who burned their school and wondered why she asked. Clare brushed it off, but Sid sighed, knowing trials awaited her, her anxiety, pain, and reality she had to face. He said that tingling arm was part of growing up, and that they couldn't stop it. On a cliff, Queen Elizabeth and Mary looked down as Sid thought about all they had endured and how it was finally over, with everything ending well. Counting his recovered gold coins, Sid realized he had salvaged 500 out of 3,000 worth 50 million zeni, enough to get by. He noted that Lawless City still had 2 towers left, which he considered his personal piggy bank. In the final scene, Sid boarded a train and shifted into his shadow form, only to be challenged by Yukimi, who appeared before him and told him it was time to hear what he had to say. Some thugs stopped Miss Ghosh's transportation train and told the girls their company was making way too much money. They claimed the goods were worth at least 100 million jenny right now, and business was booming so much that their boss wanted to shut them down. Then, they went straight for one of the girls, tearing her clothes. When she asked who their boss was, they said a guy named Tur controlled all buying and selling in Midgar, and she had apparently pissed him off. The girl couldn't believe it and insisted Gator was a respected gentleman, president of the major cooperative alliance, a devout follower of the divine teaching, and a big church donor. There was no way he'd hire scumbags like these to ruin business. The thug fired back that even good people had a dark side, and Gator got rich by hiring thugs just like them. The girl went quiet, admitting deep down she already knew the truth. Right then, Alpha showed up with a bunch of Shadow Garden members, revealing they had figured out the thugs' plan. The 3 girls among them, also Shadow Garden members, were ready to fight. Alpha ordered everyone to attack, and the thugs didn't stand a chance. Later, a member reported that by killing the legitimate ranks, they had forced the underworld cult players to show their faces. Alpha warned that the war was about to begin. Cut to Sid's friends showing off some flashy clothes they'd bought from Miss Ghosh, bragging about how girls would be impressed and dreams would come true. Sid, checking out the designs, figured they were made by Ida. Everyone was busy with their own stuff. Suddenly, the logos on Skull's clothes started peeling off, causing a mini panic, because without the logos, the clothes were worthless. They even thought about removing the logos to stick them on other clothes to make fake branded stuff. When they peeled off the logos, they realized the clothes were just cheap knockoffs with pasted-on logos. They felt cheated and watched their money disappear. Then they noticed Sid's clothes still looked real. Sid explained his clothes were actually made by Alpha and the others, representing his past life. He thought people wearing suits on the street was local culture, but it was all Alpha's work using his past knowledge to grow their market share. He knew the rival companies wouldn't be thrilled, but since they were making money off his ideas, it was fine. For now, because today everything would end. Sid told his friends he needed to hit the washroom, but really, he was leaving to take back what was his. He then stood somewhere strange, changed into a different outfit, and declared that from today on he was a super elite secret agent. Tonight, the world would finally learn his name. Meanwhile, Shadow showed up at Yaku's place and said he was done with the name Shadow and would go by John Smith now. Yaku was happy to have him on board, and Shadow admitted he was in it for the profit too. Yaku teased that Shadow was all business, but Shadow reminded him Yaku did the same. Yaku told him to stop pretending otherwise. Yaku shared that recently Gator called a major cooperative alliance meeting, planning to take down Mr. Gosh and shut down Miss Ghosh's company, with no change in their plan. Miss Gosh and the MCA were busy tearing each other apart, and Shadow said they'd take everything in the end. Yaku warned Shadow to be careful because behind MCA was a bigger fish, an underworld sportsman named Getan, the Sour Devil, who even controlled MCA before anyone knew. Yaku had a scar from Getan and swore to defeat him one day. The train stopped, and Shadow got off. Yaku expressed excitement to watch the market control fight in the royal capital, warning that after it ended, the money would be soaked in blood, and nobody knew who'd come out on top. Shadow promised to destroy everything and rebuild it his way, then walked off. Next, the market scene showed Tour Corporation selling tons of cheap goods like it was a clearance sale. Girls flocked in, while Sid's friends tried shopping but were treated like trash by some women. Sid watched and realized it wasn't just Tour Corporation. Every other company was slashing prices to crush Miss Gosh. That meant Alpha and the others had seriously gained ground. They were selling explosive products that could only be bought at company stores, and without permission from local distributors. This obviously made the downtown shopping district furious. Yaku's warning was spot on. Miss Ghosh was about to get tons of heat from the industry, and they'd do everything to crush her. But Shadow was already planning to burn it all down and build something new from the ashes. He was dead set on destroying Miss Ghosh's enemies while wiping the slate clean for himself. His plan was to take all the leftover money, jump into a fresh market, and start a new corporation, inviting Alpha and the other girls to run the show from the top. All he needed was a name change, and Miss Gauche's empire would rise again. Once that happened, everyone would have to admit it was the best move. Meanwhile, Sid's friends were struggling big time during the sale. Their clothes were tearing, and the store only accepted payment in coins. Sid looked at the bill and felt something was off. When Skull asked what was wrong, Sid admitted he didn't recognize the design on the notes. Poe chipped in, explaining these were new notes issued by the major cooperative alliance, and the sale was just a way to promote them. Sid asked what notes were used before, and Poe showed him the old ones from Mr. Gauche's bank. Skull explained those notes used to be accepted only at Miss Gauche's stores, but now they worked citywide. It was basically like they'd made their own bank. That reminded Sid of a time when he was younger, trying to explain banks and credit creation to Bada and others, but he ended the conversation quickly. Turns out, they took that info and actually started a bank with their own currency. Skull called those notes knockoffs, and Sid noticed the difference right away. Miss Gauche's notes had multicolor printing and careful watermarks, while the cooperative alliances looked like they were slapped together with a cheap design. Sid remembered when he was a kid, thinking he could copy a 1,000 gun note on a copy machine to make quick money, but he dropped the idea after an angry shop owner gave him a talking to. Now that he was a super elite secret agent, he thought it was time to try again. Without hesitation, Sid grabbed a note and ran, with his friends chasing after him, trying to stop the madness. That night, Sid met Yaku again, showing off some magic by turning one gold coin into many coins. He said he wanted to pull off something similar. Yaku asked if he was talking about paper money, notes. Shadow confirmed and explained how notes, despite having no weight, functioned as currency because carrying heavy coins was a pain, so people mostly used notes for bigger purchases. He gave an example. If someone deposited 10,000 jenny at a bank, they'd get a note for that amount, which they could spend, effectively doubling the money in circulation. If the original deposit just sat in the bank untouched, it was fine. But when the bank lent that money out to others, it created more notes, and that was good news for Miss Gauche's bank. Merchants wanting loans would borrow from the bank, which would print more paper money, profiting from the interest on those loans. That was the true value of credit cushions. Yaku mentioned that Mr. Gauche had been doing this for ages and said whoever came up with the idea had to be pretty brilliant. She wanted to meet him someday. Shadow handed her 2 notes to compare. Yaku pointed out that one had a watermark while the other didn't. Shadow said the rougher one with the crude printing was the major cooperative alliance's note. Yaku noted that meant those notes were easy to copy, and Shadow grinned, saying they planned to make counterfeit money and rake in serious cash. Yaku warned that since those notes were already circulating in the royal capital, trying to copy them would probably get the authorities sniffing around. But if they kept the amount small, maybe they could fly under the radar, though she doubted they'd make much money that way. Shadow suddenly trembled, dropping some coins, then came over and asked if Yaku really thought they couldn't make bank that way. Yaku explained she had figured out Shadow's plan perfectly. He wanted the counterfeit money to get caught so that people would lose trust in those notes and rush to the bank to swap them for coins. And since the bank already had tons of cash just sitting there, this would end up making them a huge profit. She pointed out that this had been his plan all along. Shadow, however, stayed quiet because, honestly, the plan wasn't his idea at all. It was all something Yaku had come up with herself. She challenged him to admit whether he really believed that, and Shadow, feeling a bit shaken by her intensity, agreed that the plan was flawless. Then, the station arrived, and Shadow left, while Yaku commented that he had just been testing her honesty and was glad she hadn't messed up under the pressure. Afterwards, Shadow Garden members took control of the market by eliminating some of their enemies, while Sid quietly ate, thinking that now his John Smith identity was out in the open. He had to keep it hidden and focus on completing his mission against Miss Gauche and the major cooperative alliance, and he couldn't help but feel pretty slick about betraying his own group in order to save it. Meanwhile, Shadow was feeding Delta, who kept asking for more food, and after stuffing her, they left together, with Delta sitting on his shoulder, mentioning that she smelled fox on him. Sid admitted that he had been hunting fox and asked why she was around, and Delta explained that Alpha had sent her to hunt bandits here and asked if Sid wanted to come along. Sid told her to forget it and joked about whether she really thought she could meet Alpha. to which Delta admitted she had forgotten and that Alpha would definitely be mad at her. Sid told her to go face Alpha quickly, and when Delta asked about the bandits, Sid said she reminded him of John, his pet from a past life. Meanwhile, Getten heard about another failure, and Gator said that their private soldiers had proven to be stronger than expected, making the bandits useless, so Getten promised that this time he would send the Clovers. Sid got excited, explaining that those Clovers were elite assassins personally chosen by Getten, and if they were unleashed, they'd uncover all of Miss Gauche's secrets. Next, Delta was busy killing thugs while Shadow collected their money and treasure. But a man stopped Delta, claiming to be Jabra, her big brother, surprised she was still alive since he had heard she was possessed and hunted by their dad. Delta shrugged it off, saying she was just good at hide and seek, but Jabra reminded her that he worked for Legend Garden and that she shouldn't kill family. Delta killed him anyway, saying she didn't want weak brothers ruining the family name, and explaining that their dad was the clan chief with many wives and thousands of children, so losing one weakling wasn't a big deal since weak ones died, and if there weren't enough, they would just make more because that was their law. Shadow thought they were a strange bunch, and they left with Delta sitting on Shadow's shoulder, suggesting that he become clan chief by defeating her dad, which would give him many wives and children and make the clan the strongest, but Shadow declined, saying he wasn't interested, and walked off. Later, Getten learned that Jabra was dead, and Gator said they were losing valuable people, and if it kept happening, their personnel would suffer badly because they had invested heavily to start their own bank and print their own notes, and they would need more money to continue, so they had to take a step back. Getten asked if they really controlled all commerce in the city, but Gator denied it, though he promised he hadn't forgotten. Getten told him to follow his orders and summon the other 3 Clovers because Jabra was the weakest, and they needed to strengthen their offense against Miss Gauche and get all of her trade secrets. Gator agreed and left, and Getten admitted that Mr. Gauche was stronger than he had expected and now understood why the cult saw him as a real threat. At the start, quite a few people were seen jumping from the rooftop, moving all over the place, while on the other side, Gamma told Alpha they had managed to cut down attacks on their transport train and were basically running the marketplace. He mentioned that the major cooperative alliance didn't have Shadow's smarts, so those trying to push paper money and create credit wouldn't last long, and if things kept going this way, he was sure they'd eventually collapse under their own big ambitions. Alpha agreed, but reminded him that they had to be careful about what they didn't do. Gamma confirmed he knew they couldn't do anything that would link Mr. Gauche or Shadow Garden to their moves, so they'd have to play it passive with the major cooperative alliance for now. Alpha added that trust could break in a heartbeat, so they had to focus all their energy on keeping it solid, reminding Gamma that Shadow himself must have drilled that lesson into him. Gamma said he'd been taught well and that they shouldn't rush into anything foolish. Just then, news showed up announcing their guests had arrived, meaning their enemies, and Gamma complained that Gator was way too impatient. Alpha said Gator was young and couldn't hold back his fighter spirit. When Nu tried to suggest handling the guests himself, Gamma jumped in, insisting he be the one to teach their enemies a lesson, and Alpha agreed, telling the other 2 members to back Gamma up. Everyone got hyped but ignored Gamma's initial words. With that, the 3 headed off to face their foes, and Alpha told Nu that maybe Gamma would be fine after all since he was only 17, which got Nu excited too. In the next scene, the same people entered Isley's place, where those goons turned out to be Clovers. They noted there was no security, guessing it must all be on the transport, and one of them reminded the others that their real target was the manager, an elf woman named Luna, so they started looking for her office. Then Gamma showed up and introduced herself as Manager Luna, surprising everyone by immediately attacking and knocking down 2 elf goons. The goons got fired up, with one bragging about being the strongest in the Clovers. For those wondering, the Clovers were sent by Etan, and if that name sounds unfamiliar, viewers were encouraged to check the previous episode. That guy charged at Gamma, but she barely got hurt, which only pumped him up more. Gamma stepped back, calling out how crazy it was to launch such a strong attack so early, warning she'd have to fight seriously now. She drew her sword, which made the guy freak out, calling it some kind of dark magic, like it couldn't be real. Gamma then launched a series of attacks, but the guy said she was just a newbie and easily dodged everything. Gamma's sword began to glow, and she confidently told him she recognized his sword style as that of a student of Western teacher Orn, which made the guy proud but also confused about how she knew. Gamma explained that knowing his style meant she could counter it easily. She attacked again and landed several hits, but the guy still dodged without breaking a sweat. He pulled out a blade and swung at her, but the blade bent on impact, barely hurting her, which made the guy even more excited, wondering what had just happened when his attack failed so badly. Gamma admitted he was a skilled fighter for daring to attack her and said she'd give him a real fight now. Then she unleashed a magical attack, but the guy dodged and leapt up as the attack shattered the ground beneath. Gamma reminded him to listen to what her master had taught her. She recalled Shadow telling her that she had strong stats and that in battle, she had to pack a ton of magical energy into her sword before releasing it all at once. Just as she was about to strike with full power, she tripped on a stone and fell, causing her attack to hit and break the building instead. Alpha noticed and rubbed her forehead in frustration while the guy got even more hyped. Gamma admitted he was amazing and called out his trap that made her fall, but the guy denied setting any trap at all. The guy quickly realized he couldn't stick around anymore and started searching for his buddies, but before he could get far, an elf showed up, took down one of his companions, and asked if he was looking for the rest. Gamma warned her team to watch out because this guy was no joke. He had mastered Leech Rose technique, and since she had seen it firsthand, she was the one to take him on. Getting ready to give it her all, Gamma faced him down, but the guy got cold feet and bolted, only to be chased by Gamma, who wasn't about to let him get away. Unfortunately for her, she tripped on a stone again, dropped her sword, and it slid forward without her control. The guy kept running, but Gamma's sword caught him right in the back of the neck, causing an explosion that took him out instantly. She chuckled to her team, bragging about her secret move, the self-sacrifice spinning wheel, though it probably looked more like a lucky accident than anything. Meanwhile, Turgatin got bad news that the Clovers hadn't come back, and the reinforcements were missing too, with no contact from the lookout team. Someone mentioned some MCA members might be cozy with Mr. Goshi, which they'd have to discuss soon. Gatton's reaction was straightforward. If anyone was connected to Goshi, they were to be killed. He left without much fuss, but thought about how many people were already dead and how few soldiers were left to send. It was the perfect chance for him to show off his power because the Magic Cooperative Alliance was just a bunch of disposable puppets in his eyes. He planned to keep them going just long enough for his big plan to come together, promising a power no one would be able to take away. A flashback showed a man killing his companions, hinting at a personal vendetta waiting to be settled. Later, Galax was sparring with Sid and managed to knock his sword away, which earned a slow clap from Sid. Alexia looked worried because she knew Sid wasn't going all out. When they took a break to eat, Sid told Alexia she'd done well and thought she'd only get better if she kept it up. He mused that whenever someone improves, something usually changes, maybe Alexia's mindset or a new skill she'd picked up. Alexia admitted she wasn't satisfied and wanted more power because she felt useless just watching things fall apart. With Rihanna losing her king and her friend away, chaos had set in, and she couldn't just stand by anymore. She was determined to get stronger because if she didn't move forward, she'd be left behind, and she didn't want to be an outsider anymore. Since making that decision, time seemed to speed up for her. Sid shrugged it off, saying whatever happens, happens, which she found refreshing and hoped he stayed that carefree forever before walking off. Meanwhile, people were keeping an eye on Shadow. Yoku approached and told him production was finished. Shadow smiled, sensing the moment had arrived. Yoku explained that the domain they were targeting used to be ruled by Viscount Greece, but now local magistrates had weak law enforcement. There was an abandoned mine she liked there which no one would check, so they were using it to produce counterfeit notes, then moving them temporarily to Lawless City. From there, they planned to disguise distribution channels and flood Midgar with fake currency. Yoku showed Shadow a fake note and a real one, bragging about how hard they'd worked to make them indistinguishable. Shadow handed one back, pointing out differences in paper quality and ink, and even brought up distortion issues. Yoku insisted she'd triple-checked everything. When Shadow revealed that the real note was actually the fake one, it showed just how good the counterfeit was, even better than the original. He admitted he doubted anyone else could tell the difference, making Yoku praise his skills and push to start distribution immediately. Yoku cautioned that once the fake currency flooded the market, authorities would try to trace the source, and they'd have to handle that carefully. Meanwhile, Garten was burning with revenge, declaring that since Shadow had taken everything from him, His mom, friends, village, it was now his turn to take everything back and kill him. Shadow told Garten that he could go ahead and kill him, but only if he made sure to never lose his way and stray down the wrong path. Later, Gamma informed Alpha about the fake notes spreading through the major cooperative alliance, explaining that these counterfeit bills had turned up in many of their stores. Alpha agreed that accepting their competitors' currency had been a smart move, while Gamma added that their plan was just to siphon off credit from the rivals' money. When Alpha asked how widespread the fake notes were, Gamma said it wasn't much yet since customers who handed them over didn't even realize the notes were fake, so no one had any clue where they were coming from. Alpha wondered if the major cooperative alliance was aware of this, and Gamma said probably not. They were too carefree, printing more notes without worrying. Alpha ordered Gamma to make sure people found out about the fake notes soon, warning that if citizens caught on that the money was fake, it would trigger a massive crisis and shake confidence in paper money, dealing a serious blow to their business. Alpha paused to think deeply, wondering if the whole thing was some master plan to collapse credit, but questioned why anyone would want to bring about their own downfall. Before long, Alpha commanded Gamma to track down the source of the fake notes quickly, and Gamma agreed before heading off. Meanwhile, Alpha kept pondering who could be behind this scheme, and why they would risk so much if it wasn't just a petty cash grab. Elsewhere, Tear and Getten discovered that cashiers in their stores had recently been receiving fake notes too, and even they couldn't tell which ones were real anymore. Getten told Tear to find the source immediately, and Tear left to investigate. Getten reflected on how the value of banknotes in circulation under MC assets had long since exceeded their actual worth, and that's where credit came in. The same principle applied to Mr. Ghosh's operation. The only thing that backed paper money's value was trust in credit, and fake notes were nothing but worthless paper. If people started realizing this, panic would spread, causing them to doubt the money in their wallets and likely refuse to use paper money at all, which would tank its value. To avoid this, they'd started printing their own fake notes to bring down the value of paper money overall, aiming to destroy both the Magic Cooperative Alliance and Mr. Ghosh's company. That was the cult's mission for Getten, but they couldn't let it get out of hand until they recovered all the cult's assets hidden inside the MCA. Since those assets were tangled with the public business and organization, retrieving them would take time. Getten wondered if the people behind the plan had any clue about the bigger picture. Letting fake notes spread unchecked could cause the cult to lose a fortune. Something wasn't adding up. Later, some Shadow Garden members boarded a train carrying fake notes destined for Lawless City, ready to investigate the source and gather info. Rose, member number 6686, was reminded not to make any decisions herself since their leader was in charge, and she agreed, still shaken after a previous mission's chaos. Inside the train, they found no passengers or guards, but Rose noticed a suspicious string too late. Many strings suddenly sprang to life, trapping two members. Rose looked back and saw Shadow standing there, but no one recognized him. It turned out Shadow had tied them up with magically reinforced thread that was unbreakable. When Rose asked who he was, Shadow answered that he was John Smith. She tried to attack with her sword, but Shadow swiftly stunned the blade and reminded her that clever moves weren't enough to stand against him. Then he bound the rest of them with the same strings. Shadow said he expected Rose to be the first to figure out the fake notes, but it was too early for her, and it would be better if she forgot about it. After that, he threw them out the window. Rose fell, got back up, and tried to fight again, but another member stopped her, warning that chasing Shadow without a plan would only get them trapped again. Rose calmed down and stopped struggling. The other member noticed the train's speed had picked up so much that even running wouldn't help them catch it, so they agreed to report the incident to Lady Gam. Meanwhile, Rose remained confused, thinking about John Smith's powers and why she felt so weak despite everything. At Mitsugoshi Company headquarters, 664 finished her report, and Alpha looked genuinely surprised to hear that 3 of their numbers had been taken down by a new opponent, while Gamma, who had no information on this John Smith and suspected he might be a named child of the Cult of Diablos, stayed quiet as Alpha instead suggested he could be someone from the Lawless City. The two leaders kept debating his origin, but 666 interrupted to emphasize John Smith's strength, which left 664 scrambling to keep her in line and panicking over the thought of punishment. So she quickly rushed 666 out of the office, while 665 casually sang a farewell to Alpha and Gamma. Once they were gone, Gamma resumed her briefing, explaining that she had assigned Zeta to search for an objective they had discussed earlier, while Alpha hoped that Zeta's silence simply meant her mission was going smoothly. And meanwhile, Zeta was indeed keeping watch over her target alongside her backup. The cult's resistance remained heavy, and Alpha admitted she wanted this drawn-out fighting to end soon, so they could finally relax, which worried Gamma, though she decided to send Delta after John Smith, and the Therianthrope was already more than ready to hunt. On a train leaving the lawless city, John Smith flipped through his notebook, unaware at first that Delta was prowling along the train's roof. But when she finally charged in and burst through his cabin like a feral beast, his magical strings halted her attack in an instant, and he calmly holstered his notebook to focus on fighting her. Delta dodged the strings with agility and let out a roar so powerful that it tore through the train cabin, sending debris flying. But John Smith immediately used that chaos to pin her under the rubble. He stood over her, prepared to deliver a villain's monologue, yet Delta suddenly shifted from furious to curious as she caught his scent, and when she realized he was actually her master shadow, she sprang up playfully, ruining his dramatic roleplay, which left Sid dejected, though he quickly got over it and carried her piggyback to another train cabin. Sid questioned why she was there, and Delta confirmed that Alpha had sent her to hunt John Smith. But now that she knew John Smith was him, she also knew she stood no chance of winning, so he ordered her not to report back, explaining that he was in the middle of a secret mission. Delta wanted to accompany him, but he turned her down, saying it was something only he could do, and that her reporting back could ruin everything. Torn between loyalty to Alpha and obedience to him, Delta hesitated, so Sid reminded her that his authority overrode Alpha's, assigning her a special mission instead and promising a reward, within reason, which instantly got her excited. He broke open the window, pointed her toward the lawless city, and told her to hunt Juggernaut at the Black Tower, while she double-checked her assignment, and he reminded her that the reward would be under his conditions. And with that, she gleefully leapt away as he sighed, already exhausted by the situation and quietly thinking about Alpha, though he reassured himself that Delta would return home once the weather warmed up. The next day, Gamma reported that their scouts had found the train battle site, along with Delta's cracked and broken bell ornament, and Alpha's shock was immediate, while Gamma feared the worst, because they both knew Delta would never abandon a mission. Alpha ordered them to keep searching, even if it was only to recover her presumed dead body, and in her quiet rage, she cracked the window of her office. Gamma then updated her about the continued flooding of counterfeit bills in the market, far more than the assets required to redeem them, and Alpha concluded that John Smith had planned the entire credit collapse, crippling the major corporate alliance and leaving Mitsugoshi trapped in their commerce war so he could take everything for himself. Gamma was stunned at his ambition, and Alpha's fury boiled over as her mana manifested into a blue flame. At the major corporate alliance's office, Getten sat across from two agents of the cult, listening as they voiced their concerns over the sudden credit collapse and the massive losses the cult had suffered in their holdings. And when one of the agents dared to make a joke about Getten's personal matters, his head was taken clean off in an instant by Getten, who never even rose from his seat, leaving the second agent frozen in fear as the headless body slumped to the floor. Getten then asked if John Smith was behind all of this, and the remaining agent nervously admitted that their investigation had indeed. Meanwhile, Iris was making her way back home after a long day of training when she spotted Alexia walking through the castle grounds, struggling under the weight of a stack of books, and she was surprised to see her younger sister out of school. Alexia calmly explained that the academy was still undergoing reconstruction, and she had come to the palace archives because she believed it would be easier to find books on social studies there. Iris raised an eyebrow at the thought of her sister turning to scholarship. In Sid's dorm room, Beta stood by his side, giving him a detailed report on how the counterfeit bills were wreaking havoc on the capital's economy, while Sid, as Shadow, sat by his firepot, sneezing from the chill in the air despite the flames keeping the room warm. Beta went on to explain that the royal family would soon be forced to act, and that Garter's new checkpoints had only made things worse. But she paused when she noticed Sid's quiet demeanor and asked if he was even taking notes. Thinking she had lost him, Beta apologized for overwhelming her master and offered to restart the briefing, but Shadow waved her on and told her to keep going as he warmed his hands over the fire. Her tone grew heavier when she reported that there had been no sign of Delta, who was now presumed dead, and Shadow found himself quietly puzzled over why she had not returned yet. Elsewhere, John Smith was quietly reviewing the same information from Beta's report when Natsu informed him that their train was approaching an MCA checkpoint, prompting him to close his notebook and prepare. At the checkpoint, a younger member of the MCA nervously wondered aloud. Moments later, their fears became reality as the oncoming train tore through the checkpoint with devastating ease, destroying everything in its path without slowing down. With John Smith perched casually on the nose of the moving train, he spotted a figure waiting for him, her outline cloaked in shadow, and was greeted by Alpha before she abruptly prepared to say her farewell. However, John Smith moved faster, countering her and pushing her into a defensive stance. And Alpha, with every calculated motion, began to realize with growing devastation that the man in front of her was none other than Shadow, recognizing him not by his mask, but by his terrifyingly precise skill. The weight of that truth crushed her as she demanded answers, but he calmly claimed that he had abandoned his name and now only lived as John Smith. At an abandoned mine, Yukimi revealed the staggering piles of gold her counterfeiting operation had amassed, their success having drained the major corporate alliance dry. She calmly explained that she had also been collecting authentic currency, planning to exchange it publicly so that the alliance's insolvency would become undeniable, triggering a credit collapse that would shatter their control, drag Mitsugoshi into the chaos, and create an economic chain reaction so severe that even the government would be forced to intervene. And once that chaos reached its peak, Yukimi intended to erase every trace of her operation and disappear without a trace, leaving nothing but ruin behind. John Smith, referencing Beta's intel with an unnerving calm, noted that the inflation spike had already reached a level that guaranteed a state-level response, and Yukimi, impressed by his foresight, praised his sharp mind. Later, as they rode the train away from their hidden storehouse, Yukimi's tone softened, and she revisited the story she had once told him about her youth in a quiet, remote village. She recounted how, after the legendary great hero Shiva had fallen in battle, powerful clans turned on each other for his crown, and her Spirit Fox clan found itself caught in the crossfire, forced to ally with the great wolves to survive. As the only daughter of the rare three-tailed fox, Yukime was betrothed to Getten, the son of the great wolves' leader. And though their union was once celebrated with hope and joy, the wars of greater clans spilled into their lands and reduced their village to ash. On a cloudy morning, Iris Midgar was in full grind mode, practicing hard for her upcoming match, while her mind drifted back to how she went from a kid who outshined her mentors to being a Night Order favorite and a past Bushin Festival champ. But despite all that, she felt boxed in, especially after Alpha's snarky digs and how useless she felt during the Academy attack. She slammed her sword into the practice dummy a little harder, remembering how her dad shut her down cold, refusing her access to the divine teachings just because she couldn't back up her claims. No one really got why she was so fired up, and her dad even accused her of risking the whole kingdom just to prove a point. That made her grit her teeth and swear she'd get some real results, even if a little doubt still crept in. Later, as the storm rolled over the Bushin Festival finals, Sid was living it up in the VIP section, getting anything he wanted handed over by maids, like he was some sort of king. Iris slid into the seat next to him, guessing he was here to root for his sister, and mentioned she was off duty for the day because she had her own fight coming up. She wrinkled her nose at Sid's black coffee, admitting she wasn't about that bitter life unless it had milk and sugar. Sid schooled her on the fix, and after a quick mix, Iris was hooked, loving her new milk coffee. Sid smirked, thinking if this breakfast got out, it'd break the internet. Then the guards stopped a woman rocking a sword, ordering her to hand it over, but she wasn't having it. The crowd started buzzing until Iris dropped the name Beatrix, the war goddess herself, whom she had invited personally. Sid tried to keep his cool but was getting antsy as everyone swarmed around Beatrix, recognizing her instantly. Beatrix used the moment to ask if anyone had seen her niece, but no luck. Meanwhile, Sid realized this was the biggest spotlight he'd ever had as a background dude. When folks asked if anyone caught Beatrix's eye, she cheekily pointed at Sid, causing a stir because, let's be real, compared to his superstar sister, Sid looked like the town's average Joe. Some doubted her taste, others backed her up, and Sid just wanted to disappear. Still, he quietly admired Beatrix. No flashy show, just raw, effortless power hidden behind that burger-munching act. Meanwhile, Perv Asshat was up to his usual mess, dosing King Raphael Girk Oriana with drugs and complaining about the sickly sweet smell messing with his nose. So he had his goons try to cover it with perfume like that was gonna fix anything. Dragging the groggy king to his seat, Perv figured Rose would eventually show up to save her dad, but he was already worried she was possessed and perfect for the cult's twisted experiments. If she didn't show, he had a nasty backup plan to stir up war between kingdoms by turning the king against Midgar. Even if that meant losing his own status, Perv didn't care. He had bigger schemes to pull. But now he was sweating over this mundane man guy, having found zilch on him and worried he might be tied to the underworld. So, Perv sent his minions around the arena to keep tabs, but the thought of Shadow Garden and Rose working together kept him up at night. Walking past Beatrix in VIP, she tossed him some shade about how he and the king stank, which set Perv off ordering guards to throw her out, until Iris stepped in, reminding him she was a guest. Now Perv was officially panicked, realizing Beatrix wasn't just some burger-loving brawler, but the real deal, possibly the spark to awaken Hero's blood. He forced a fake apology and sat down, still trying to figure out how to get rid of her without blowing his cover. Spotting Sid sneaking off to the bathroom, Perv took a deep breath and tried to chill, telling himself to ignore the clueless crowd and focus on his mess. When the next match kicked off, Clare snagged a win while Iris headed out to face Mundane Man. As she walked past the knights cheering, she told herself those cheers were her fuel. People needed to see that her strength meant the kingdom's strength. She was dead set on beating Mundane. But weirdly, even standing right in front of him, she couldn't sense an ounce of his power. It bugged her because she was sure he was no joke, but whatever he was hiding, she promised herself she wouldn't give him a second to pull it out and end the fight early. Meanwhile, Clare noticed Sid's seat was empty and started hunting for him among the snack stands, making the crowd do double takes. Once the fight started, Iris got rocked so hard she thought she lost a limb, but it was all in her head, literally. Mundane had this sneaky way of messing with her senses, making her believe he was chopping off her leg while he was just chilling a few feet away, calm as ever. She realized the entire arena was basically his playground. The crowd started whispering, thinking Iris was scared and stumbling, which fired her up enough to unleash a powerful magical strike, only to find out Mundane wasn't even holding his sword. All the moves she thought he was making were illusions, and before she could catch on, he disarmed her, grabbed her by the throat, and pinned her down with his blade at her neck. She froze, barely able to breathe. Outside, the rain started pouring as King Klaus Midgar quietly slipped away, disappointed. The crowd buzzed in disbelief, and Perv Asshat was utterly dumbfounded, struggling to wrap his head around how Iris lost without even moving, amazed that Mundane could pull off illusions like that, something even the toughest Dark Knights couldn't do. Beatrix, watching nearby, was itching for a fight with Mundane. Then Rose made a dramatic entrance, surprising everyone by showing up in the VIP area, apologizing to her dad for her mistakes but saying she was following her own path. In a surprising twist, King Oriana forgave her freely, which threw Perv off big time since he hadn't ordered that at all. Just as Mundane approached, Rose stabbed her father, who told her he loved her with his last breath. Shocked by how easily Rose killed the king, Perv ordered his men to stop her, but Rose was ready to take her own life, and Mundane jumped in through a window, cutting down Perv's goons. When Mundane revealed himself as Shadow, Rose finally connected the dots. He was the stylish bandit slayer who had once saved her from bandits and inspired her to become a fencer. She'd been in awe of his skills even when he was just a masked kid. Shadow himself remembered thinking she was some kind of therianthrope girl back then. Though Rose felt weak now, Shadow reminded her the fight wasn't over, pushing her to stand and run. Perv wanted to stop her, but all his men were wiped out by Shadow Garden operatives. Beatrix jumped in next, grinning like she'd hit the jackpot at the chance to face Shadow. Their clash was so fierce it shattered the VIP seating, and while they battled it out on the stadium roof, Perv took the chaos as a perfect escape opportunity. As Iris lay defeated in the pouring rain, Mundane Man shifted his focus and spotted Rose Oriana sitting in the VIP section. Without wasting time, he made his way over just as Iris was starting to get up, and then Mundane revealed himself as Shadow, dropping the mundane act. Thinking back on all the chaos, the bounty on his head, the Academy attack, his run-in with Alpha, that explosion during Alexia's kidnapping, he realized everything was leading to this reveal. Iris let out a furious scream while Shadow jumped straight into a fight with Beatrix, and their clash shook the VIP seating so badly that the whole stadium had to be cleared out. Meanwhile, King Klaus Midgar was getting updates that the battle was getting so wild it might spill beyond the stadium. He asked about Perv Ashhat, only to find out the guy was already speeding away in a carriage back to Oriana Kingdom, skipping the embassy stop like he was dodging trouble. The Midgar Knights were handling King Oriana's body, and the king ordered it sent back home through the Marquess, Grant, even though a guard warned it could spark civil war because Grant was the anti-chancellor faction leader. King Klaus just nodded, saying they needed to brace themselves because the darkness that's been lurking forever was only getting darker. Back at the wrecked VIP seating, Iris showed up to grab something to even the odds against Shadow. Meanwhile, on the stadium roof, Shadow and Beatrix were going at it hard. Shadow was clearly impressed by Beatrix's skills, and to test her, he started messing with his presence, sneaking behind her like a ninja while she barely managed to block his attacks. She realized he shifted his presence like how she couldn't track every raindrop falling, slippery and tricky. Shadow teased that this was just the warm-up, and then Iris appeared, ready to crash the party with an ancient mithril blade covered in glowing runes. Shadow was caught off guard, thinking she was pulling out an old-school cheat code. When Iris asked if he thought it was cheating, he was chill about it, but amused that she needed a crutch. Not one to back down, Iris charged the blade with her mana, turning it into a giant flaming sword and swung at Shadow, who dodged effortlessly while complimenting her festival-ready visuals. Beatrix tried to flank Shadow, but he shut that down quickly, keeping the fight focused, while Iris teamed up with Beatrix to bring the heat. Meanwhile, Clare was still wandering around looking for her missing brother, while Rose slipped away into a dark alley. Rose was stuck debating whether to head back to Oriana Kingdom and join the anti-chancellor faction. Just then, Alpha showed up, and the royal drama turned into a three-way brawl all over the capital. Iris managed to push Shadow onto a construction site rooftop, where Shadow pulled out 2 crowbars and effortlessly blocked attacks from both Iris and Beatrix, even complimenting how crowbars actually have some hidden potential. The fight escalated, crashing through buildings and ending up on top of a speeding train. Shadow twirled his crowbars like a circus performer, daring them to keep up while warning them not to fall off. Back in the alley, Alpha laid out Rose's options: keep fighting solo or join Shadow Garden. When Rose asked if they planned to help save Oriana Kingdom, Alpha made it clear they weren't interested in lending a hand unless Rose proved she and her kingdom were worth saving. After a beat, Rose decided to join Shadow Garden, and Alpha welcomed her by coating her in a slimy bodysuit to help them sneak away unnoticed. While fighting on top of a speeding train, Iris demanded to know who he really was, growing more annoyed by his dumb, mundane man act that clearly wasn't fooling anyone. Beatrix wondered if she had met Shadow before, to which he smugly said he remembered powerful opponents, tossing the question back to them if they were strong enough to be remembered. Then, Shadow jumped into the river and used some water magic called the Witch's Secret Art, which Beatrix immediately recognized as a vampire trick. Iris managed to evaporate the attack, but Shadow quickly pointed out that magic doesn't work well in regular water before delivering a swift kick to Iris's face, sending her into the river. Surprisingly, Beatrix broke his crowbars with an attack, shaking things up. Meanwhile, Anaros was standing at the train station, annoyed that Mundane hadn't shown up yet, but she shrugged it off with a smile and said she'd catch him another time. On the clock tower, Beatrix was getting used to Shadow's sneaky surprise attacks and could block them more easily now. Shadow, ever the show-off, congratulated her for almost matching Shadow Garden's sword skills, but still invited her to learn some proper magic from him. Iris attacked wildly, but looked like a beginner, as Shadow blocked her with a casual fist. Regrouping, Shadow told the two that they couldn't beat him by borrowing power from others. Iris said she was going to make a sacrifice play to give Beatrix a shot. and Shadow just invited them to try. As Iris charged, lightning lit up the whole place. But when she dropped her sword to grapple him, Shadow disappointed her with a knee to the gut while Beatrix finished charging her attack. Beatrix pounced, but Shadow tossed his sword in the air, dodged her strike, and closed in for a melee counter. When Beatrix tried to kick him, he threw her off balance and suplexed her into Iris, smashing the ground so hard the stone cracked beneath them. Shadow caught his sword on the rebound like it was nothing. As Shadow tried to leave, Iris, struggling to stand, demanded he come back, reminding him that the whole city's knights should be mobilizing by now, making sure he had nowhere left to run. Instead of panicking, Shadow laughed like he was enjoying the chaos, then got serious and asked who was running, where, and why would he ever run? He expanded his magic across the entire royal capital, showing off his terrifying reach. Iris and Beatrix were stunned, realizing the fight was far from over. Meanwhile, Princess Alexia kept training hard, completely unfazed by the mess in the capital, declaring that no matter what happened, death or reincarnation, she would choose this path again. Back in the arena, a scared Iris dropped her mithril sword just as Shadow got all dramatic, announcing his ultimate attack. But just as he started casting the I am atomic spell, his life flashed before his eyes, and instead of finishing it, he simply cleared the stormy weather overhead, leaving everyone surprised. Beatrix accepted her loss gracefully and sheathed her sword, while Iris dropped to her knees, bawling in frustration. Far away in Laugus, an obsessed Sherry was reading headlines about the demon Shadow being chased off by Iris and Beatrix after his terror attack on the capital. She was still haunted by her father's death, and Rose was nowhere to be found, now a fugitive. Rumors about the secret society Shadow Garden, connected to Shadow, were everywhere, and the Night Order was hunting him down as the main villain. Sherry, still seething, stabbed a newspaper picture of Shadow and laughed madly in a room plastered with his wanted posters. Over in Oriana Kingdom, Mordred was talking to Perv through a magic mirror, scolding him for screwing up. Perv warned that Rose couldn't hide forever while the cult held the royal family and predicted that with their king gone, chaos was coming and Rose would definitely come back. Mordred told Perv he better be right and ordered him not to mess up again. Back at the train station, Beatrix was ready to leave, disappointed she hadn't found who she was looking for. She told Iris not to sweat the defeat since mortals couldn't win at everything, especially not yet, being still young. Iris told Beatrix she wasn't one to sit still anyway, so Beatrix understood and left on the train, pulling out an origami crane made from the wrapper of the burger Sid had given her. A small reminder to take her time and keep pushing forward. Meanwhile, the knights hunted for Shadow, and Gamma used the Mitsugoshi to magically rebuild the destroyed buildings. Beta guessed Shadow was trying to keep Midgar distracted from what was happening in Oriana Kingdom. Ita had created a special way to communicate with their people in Oriana, while others kept tabs on the major corporate alliance. As the new school term started, Sid asked Poe about Skell, learning that Skell had taken a long-term job. Poe also mentioned being away when the demon Shadow covered the capital with magic and admitted he felt bad for missing it, saying he would have comforted the scared girls if he'd been there. In the Kaganu lands, Mr. Kaganu wanted to celebrate Clare's victory, but got shut down by Mrs. Kaganu, who reminded him he was ignoring Sid. Meanwhile, at the Kaganu Mitsugoshi store, Rose and Alpha stocked up before heading into the forest, which surprised Rose since it was crawling with magical beasts. Alpha explained that when Shadow came through these mountains, he fought and beat the Mist Dragon, who then declared Shadow the ruler of the area and bathed him in dragon's breath. Alpha then revealed the secret city of Alexandria, the Shadow Garden HQ, and introduced Rose to Lambda as a new recruit. Lambda called on operatives 664 and 665 to train Rose, renaming her number 66 and telling her she had to cut all ties with her past life. Horrified, Rose watched as Lambda shredded the burger wrapper Sid gave her, sobbing in despair. Back in the underground ruins, Shadow played Moonlight Sonata again, feathers falling around him as he recited how everything was going as planned, with the hour of awakening fast approaching. After finishing, he left quietly, leaving one black feather on the piano keys. In a snowy town, Sid was sitting inside a small restaurant with Mary, a girl whose life he had saved before. Disguised as Shadow, Mary served him the only coffee she had left, explaining that the soldiers had taken everything else, claiming they needed it for the war. She mentioned how badly Main Street, their beloved street, had been destroyed and told Sid he was lucky not to get caught up in the mess. Mary added she had only recently opened the place. Sid admitted that since leaving the Midgar Kingdom, he had been wandering wherever his heart led him, using the journey to discover who he really was. He said he'd been through all sorts of situations, doing things he thought would fast-track him to becoming an eminence in shadow, but looking back, he realized he never had a clear picture of what that actually meant. He just enjoyed doing stuff that might help him get there, but wasn't sure if he was missing something or just imagining it. Mary was quick to shut down any doubts, insisting they couldn't give up. Soon after, a rude customer's companion tried to steal food meant for Mary, and she wasn't having it, reminding the thief that manners should have been taught at home. Meanwhile, Sid took a sip of his coffee, thinking hard about what he needed to do next. Cut to Rose, who was haunted by a nightmare where she had killed her father, Kingu. She woke up terrified, realizing it was just a bad dream. She explained that First Castletown used to be beautiful, but was now destroyed by war's fires. She had hoped joining Shadow Garden would make her stronger and able to save her kingdom, but she felt she'd failed. Her companions showed up, telling her it was time to move out. After changing clothes, they set off. One companion mentioned that number 559 would lead the mission, a top fighter who had beaten number 89 and earned the right to challenge others. Rose thought about the word eminent as they prepared. When asked if anyone had anything to say, the group stayed quiet, so Rose moved on. They boarded a boat and approached a castle, noting that while the castle looked mostly fine, the main street was wrecked. Number 559 confirmed they'd arrived and knew the mission, which involved Fort Fist. She explained that 2 days earlier, the cult's elite forces, the Children of Dibs, had taken over Stronghold. Though the town wasn't important, the cult's presence was suspicious, and their job was to find out what the cult was up to. Rose noticed some bodies nearby and got angry. Number 559 asked if she knew why she'd been chosen, pointing out Rose's familiarity with Fort Fist since her royal family had used it as a summer resort. Rose agreed, but 559 said there was more. Rose's power came straight from Lord Shadow. Others around them got curious and said it was an honor. Rose said she had the power but wondered if the others did. They said no. Only the 7 Shadows and Rose had powers, and they were under Lord Shadow's guidance. Number 559 added that she and Rose were exceptions, but called Rose weak. Rose fired back, saying she was a loyal servant of Lord Shadow and would take out anyone disrespecting him, warning them to watch out. Enemies began moving in large groups toward the runs, a memorial-turned-music hall for warriors who fought the Demon Dibs. The cult leader, Kodo, was there with the first children. A subordinate told Kodo that preparations were done, which made Kodo happy. He pulled out a card that triggered red markings all over the area. Rose recognized it as the same card used by a scientist she knew. The leader summoned the Royal Majesty, who turned out to be Rose's mother. Rose was shocked. The leader ordered her mother to place her hand forward, activating something that revealed royal blood. A ring appeared, said to belong to a legend guarded by the hero, Fra. Number 559 told the team to get ready for battle, insisting they kill everyone to take the ring. Though others were confused why, she said they didn't need to know, just to do it. As they prepared to attack, Rose stopped 559, warning her that her mother was down there. 559 didn't care and suddenly attacked. Disguised as Shadow, she lunged at Rose's mother, but Rose stepped in and blocked her, asking why she was attacking her own mother. The others panicked, saying Rose had lost it and needed help, so they decided to descend. Rose's mother asked if she was really Rose, but Rose stayed silent. She questioned 5559's motives, but 5559 refused to explain. The leader noticed and pointed out how the Shadow Garden team had found them but were fighting among themselves, and even brought Princess Rose along. Rose's mother grabbed her, begging to be saved, and Rose's attention wavered. Taking advantage, 559 knocked them down. Cult members came to rescue them. Number 5. Fun accused Rose of never really being loyal to Lord Shadow and vowed to kill her personally before attacking. Suddenly, Shin appeared on the scene. Reports showed the team sent to Fourth Fist had engaged in battle. Gamma said 559 was out of control and that Rose was spotted with the cult. Unfortunately, Perv Asset was absent. Nu wondered if it was a trap, but Gamma said it was unlikely, given the presence of Hero's blood and the first children. Gamma explained they'd been interfering with things for a long time, but had never revealed themselves. Knight Bundman, the 9th seat of rounds, had been pulling the strings behind the scenes in Oriana Kingdom for quite a while. While he was patient, his army didn't seem to share that virtue, and Perv Asset looked restless, beefing up his forces to keep an eye on the ruins. Gamma said they had to handle the brewing civil unrest since Oriana's security was weak, making it a prime time to send reinforcements. When it came to Rose and Oriana, Gamma said they couldn't just let the cult keep her, but worried that would only boost Perv Asset's influence and allow his real puppet master to make a move. Gamma saw the chaos as part of Lord Shadow's plan. Rose taking action triggered all this, but even he wasn't sure how the game would end. Later, Sid said no one in Oriana Kingdom could sit the throne and manage the kingdom's affairs, with pro-perfection and anti-Puff factions squabbling non-stop. He believed the Eminence in Shadow would eventually make a flashy entrance. While Sid sat drinking, Mary brought him a cold drink and told him she didn't need his help, even though there was no new ruler yet. Sid thought Oriana was stuck in this mess after the king's death, and imagined how cool it would be if Eminence in Shadow showed up with a new ruler and got praised for it. He figured Rose would be perfect if Oriana needed a new ruler, but wondered why she killed her father. Maybe she was mad because she was being forced to marry some creep. He remembered the look in her eyes, like someone ready to do anything. Rose might want to be queen, and as Eminence in Shadow, he'd help her. When she got strong, she'd be the one standing against all heroes. But someone would come to save those heroes, and that someone would be Eminence in Shadow. Sid thought it sounded like a good story for a background character and decided to get ready. Then, 3 debt collectors showed up claiming to help people but demanding money. Mary said she had none left since she'd spent it all yesterday. The thugs grabbed Mary and threatened to make her pay with her body instead. Sid jumped in, telling them to back off, though he pretended to be scared and trembled. The thugs beat Sid badly and chased him around, but Mary found him afterward and asked why he risked so much. Sid apologized, saying he tried, but they still took all her money. Mary said it was fine, revealing she'd been a prostitute in Low City and endured plenty of violence. She almost gave up, but then Shadow helped her, and now Sid did too. She promised never to quit again. The next morning, Sid left, saying he had work to do. He offered payment, but Mary refused, saying saving her was enough. As he walked away, Sid thought the thugs made a flashy entrance and exit, showing their power, and wondered if he'd just remain a background character or actually make a mark. Sid felt stuck, even though he'd tried a lot to find time for Rose. He'd snuck into a correctional facility just to live like a prisoner and feel the thrill, joined a spectacular jailbreak, and fought with a volunteer army that barely escaped alive. He'd helped recreate Oriana's legendary history alongside the Shadows, but somehow, some old guys he didn't even know stole all the glory. That wasn't right. He needed to stand out without looking like he was trying too hard. Then he spotted the same thugs talking near a hut, discussing the army losing on the Western Front, and some treasure rumored to be in ruins beyond the mountains. As they left, they took Mary with them. One thug, looking at his dead buddies, noticed Sid and got scared, asking who he was. Sid said if they wanted something, they should take it, even if it meant killing. He loved Low City's brutal rule. The strongest was always right. Since he was the strongest, he was right. Without wasting time, Sid attacked and killed the thug. Meanwhile, Mary was out of money and had no choice but to sell her body again. Suddenly, she heard the gate and saw money lying around, which made her excited. A strong wind blew, and she saw Shadow leaving. She was happy and thanked Shadow for watching over her all this time. Elsewhere, number 559 was taking down enemies non-stop. The leader called her a monster for fighting 3 nights straight, but warned her magic couldn't last forever. Number 5 showed up, looking exhausted. The leader mocked her weakness, kicked her down, and said he'd torture her and her friends slowly before finishing her, since he had a promotion on the line involving both her and Rose Oriana. Suddenly, number 5 and Nan noticed Shadow's reflection on the leader's sword. They smiled wickedly, standing up and saying Shadow had come to save them again. Shadow gave number 5 power, and her wounded hand healed instantly, shocking Watar. Number 559 said it was all thanks to Lord Shadow. Then, number 559 killed the leader cleanly, telling Shadow he looked good up top and joked that he should have brought her along. The others healed too, wondering why Lord Shadow showed up. When Shadow came down, number 559 was glad to see him and said she had a report. Number 6666 was a traitor. Shadow didn't know who number 666 was and asked what that ID meant. Number 5 said number 666 wasn't one of them and asked Shadow to order her elimination. Others stopped 559, explaining number 6666 had been trying to protect her mom, but 559 insisted that was why the theft happened and that number 6666 committed a serious crime. Shadow wondered if number 6 stole company secrets. The others told 559 to ignore number 6, saying they wanted to eliminate their friend. Number 559 said she didn't need to know number 6's business and that number 6 wasn't a friend anyway. Suddenly, a newspaper flew to Shadow announcing Rose Oriana had returned and her wedding was cancelled. Shadow got furious, thinking all his efforts were for nothing and that Rose had betrayed him. Number 5 and Nan were happy about Shadow's anger, expecting him to punish Rose. Shadow flew away fast, thinking about why Rose killed her father. Was it to become a supreme tyrant, or had she given up and decided to get married? He realized the light revealed him, and figured if he wanted to become Eminence and rise to the top, he'd have to make Rose the next ruler. Shadow declared he was coming for Rose and Oriana, and rushed off. After the report of 666's betrayal reached Shadow Garden, Lambda made her way to Oriana to confront her as her instructor, bringing a squad of reinforcements along because she knew things with the cult could get messy fast. Yet, before she could even act, Chi and Omega broke the news that this whole affair was already in Shadow's hands, leaving her to back down. Meanwhile, Sid had his own plan, and he decided to slip into the Oriana Royal Palace to tell Rose that he was against her marriage to Duke Perv. But just as he was ready to sneak inside, he ended up bumping into Epsilon, who was perfectly disguised as the pianist Chiron. And since Oriana treated anyone with artistic talent like royalty, she brought him in under the cover of being her student, which gave him easy access to the palace. While they were inside discussing Shadow Garden's movements, they crossed paths with Duke Perv, who casually mentioned that Rose wasn't feeling well and wouldn't be attending Chiron's performance, before eyeing Sid suspiciously and asking about him. Chiron introduced Sid as her student, shocking him because no one had any idea she had taken on an apprentice. And when Perv asked if Sid had a pass to be in the palace, she brushed it off, only for him to tell her that protocol had changed and everyone needed one now, though he let it slide on the condition that Sid performed a piano piece to make up for his stay. Later, Sid sat down at the piano and played Moonlight Sonata, and his performance stunned the entire audience, pulling even Duke Perv's attention, with many nobles immediately offering to become his patrons. But Chiron shut them down, telling them that Sid was still in training and not ready for the spotlight yet. While she distracted them with her words, Sid quietly slipped a ring from Perv's pocket without anyone noticing, and then he and Chiron left for a private room where he mentioned wanting to take a walk around the palace. Margaret, a palace maid who personally attended to Rose, overheard him and offered to be his guide. They walked together through a flower field, where Margaret praised his performance, saying that powerful families like Parton and New Wealth would happily pay him absurd amounts of money to work for them, even offering her own family's interest. But Sid casually declined, saying Chiron wouldn't want him taking those offers. He then asked where Rose was, and Margaret bitterly blamed Rose for Oriana's current crisis, claiming her location was a closely guarded secret. But after some hesitation, she confessed that Rose was locked away at the top of the West Tower. Sid slipped away quietly and ran into a guard named Kevin, who started ranting about how the Dark Knights were constantly risking their lives while spoiled artists lounged around enjoying fame and comfort. And before Kevin could spiral further into complaining about his hopeless crush on Margaret, Sid vanished without a trace. Rose, locked in her room, wrestled with the heavy weight of what was coming, knowing that a clash between Shadow Garden and the cult of Diabolos would soon erupt in her homeland. And as those thoughts consumed her, Sid scaled the tower wall effortlessly to meet her. He spoke of her marriage, and Rose admitted she had already accepted her fate, but Sid told her to stop throwing away her life, reminding her that she had once chosen to become a Dark Knight, despite the contempt of her people, which proved she had the strength to choose her own path again. Once Sid left, Duke Perv entered her room, coldly accusing her of having a visitor. Rose firmly reminded him their marriage would be in name only. But Perv's voice turned sharp as he warned her that her mother's life depended on how smoothly this union went. Sid, who had been eavesdropping on every word, left silently to move on to Plan B, while wedding preparations in the palace continued like clockwork. Later, Epsilon met with 559 at a lavish resort to review their progress. Epsilon noted that this was 559's first failed mission and told her not to jump to conclusions about Rose's loyalty. especially because she was considering promoting her to a rank just beneath the 7 shadows. She reminded her that Shadow himself had already contacted Rose, meaning the game had completely changed, and they now had to follow his lead instead of interfering. She also revealed the ring Cid had stolen, explaining its connection to the legendary key of the Black Rose, which had once wiped out 100,000 Velgaltan soldiers when Oriana had been on the brink of destruction. Before 559 could respond, Cid wandered in and loudly praised the resort's bath, casually assuring them that that thing would be handled. Meanwhile, Duke Perv met with Mordred and confidently reported that his plan to seize the Black Rose was running smoothly, bragging that he still held the Ring of Succession in his possession. And Mordred, impressed, promised him a coveted seat in the rounds if he succeeded. Shadow Garden was seen attacking a lab, and Zeta commented that things naturally get tougher when they face the direct subordinates of the rounds, though she still couldn't spot the elusive Knights Beyond Man anywhere. She started digging through the computer for a specific item, only to find out it had already been taken by someone else, which made Ida grimly suggest that this might be the beginning of the end for the Rihanna kingdom. Just then, a man barged in, ready to attack them, but Gamma quickly spun around, dealt a swift strike to his neck, and declared that no matter what happened, everything would still go according to their plan. Meanwhile, Cid was still hanging around the castle, mulling over the fact that Rose's hands were tied because Parvase had taken her mother hostage. He wondered why this weighed so heavily on him since he'd already come this far, but it seemed to be about Rose's personal code of ethics. Cid figured the solution was simple enough. He would use his Eminence in shadow skills to free the hostage himself, which would not only save Rose, but also bring him one step closer to becoming the legendary Titan. Just then, Margaret showed up, worried about Rose disappearing so suddenly and confessing that she hadn't slept because of a creepy stalker who'd been watching her. Luckily, the stalker had been kicked out, accused of stealing food. No one actually saw him, but everyone knew it was his thing. Cid tried to wriggle free from Margaret's hold, while she assured him she'd done everything she could to protect him, promising to shield him not just from the stalker, but also from his teacher, who apparently wanted to crush his talent more than nurture it. That's when Essen arrived and jumped into the conversation, calling out Margaret for troubling her student, while Margaret insisted she was just providing everything Cid needed. Frustrated, Cid stormed off, came back without any clothes, because he'd left them with some people to keep his presence a secret, and then started playing the piano like a pro, instantly drawing praise from onlookers. Later, Essen told Cid that those people must be on Var's side, given how casually they acted, and Cid agreed, pointing out how the palace seemed oddly unconcerned about the Dway Hooch's situation. Tosin added that novelty preferred arts over violence, and this had been the tradition in Yana ever since the days of the Black Rose. Hearing that, Cid recalled encountering a group called the Black Rose Brotherhood at the start of his journey, but insisted that group was different. He expressed a strong desire to see the real Black Rose, and Essen asked if he really wanted to. Cid eagerly said yes, assuming it was here, to which Ida warned it was very dangerous, and that they had to destroy it. Essen accepted Cid's choice, and he happily joked about wanting to look at flowers, completely clueless that the Black Rose wasn't some delicate blossom, but something far more serious. Before checking out Black Rose, Cid wanted to visit Queen Rihanna. While walking along a building wall, he overheard two people worried about how fast things were progressing by midday, with one telling the other to keep quiet and pretend they heard nothing, warning that if this continued, the kingdom wouldn't last long. Cut to Queen Rihanna and Parvase sharing a kiss, with Rihanna wondering if they could make people accept their love. Parvase told her to wait until they were married, promising that no one would dare move against Rose then. Rihanna asked if Parvase planned to marry her, but he said his love was only for her. Cid watched this scene unfold and thought it was painfully cringy. When Rihanna asked if Parvase would marry her after finishing his job killing Rose, he agreed, which made Cid decide this was totally wrong. His fantasy life was turning into a soap opera, and he knew he had to fix it because this family drama was way too complicated. He figured if Rose ever found out the truth, it might just push her to become the tyrant everyone feared. Later, Margaret poured tea for Rose and was about to leave, but Rose tried to talk to her. Margaret wasn't having it, and left, without saying much. Feeling sad, Rose realized Margaret probably wouldn't smile at her again, but she told herself that for her father's sake, she had to save her mother. Suddenly, a strong wind blew in, and Rose turned to find Shadow calmly sitting on her sofa. sipping tea. Shocked, she drew her weapon, but then lowered it, admitting she had betrayed him despite his kindness and asking for forgiveness. Shadow stood up and told her to come with him because he was going to show her the truth. Meanwhile, Rose's mother and Parvase were busy scheming, convinced that soon the kingdom would be theirs. Parvase sadly agreed, blaming Rose for their situation. Rose overheard this, refused to believe it, started vomiting, and insisted her mother could never do such a thing. She told Shadow to accept the truth, come home, take revenge, and become the tyrant everyone feared. Suddenly, Shadow noticed Rose had fainted, and he thought she had the chance to kill the traitor. But now that she was out cold, maybe he couldn't help her after all. When Rose woke up in her room, she was furious, thinking about all the lives lost and wondering what it was all for. Memories of her mother's betrayal overwhelmed her, making her sick again. Tears flowed as she wished for the happy days she once had with Sid. Then, piano music caught her attention. She got up, peered out the window, and saw Sid playing beautifully. Seeing him, Rose thought about running away together, far from everyone who would judge her for killing her father, being betrayed by her mother, and betraying her own organization. Still, she wanted Sid to stay by her side no matter what, because as long as he was with her, she could find some happiness. Sid explained how he liked playing music because it helped him make sense of the world, splitting it into what really mattered and what didn't. Rose asked why he did that, and he admitted it was because he once chased a dream he knew was impossible. Now, he refused to waste time on nonsense and focused only on what truly mattered. Rose realized she mattered to him, and he admitted she did, but said the world had a way of hiding what's important, making it easy to look away. He compared the moonlight to clarity. It helps people see things without distraction, and urged Rose to think about what she saw in the moonlight. As Sid vanished, he accidentally dropped a ring where he had been sitting, which Rose quickly grabbed. When he came back, puzzled about the missing ring, he decided to let it go, believing he had done enough to push Rose toward her revenge. Then Run showed up, offering to clean up for Sid, who complimented Run's physique and said he'd given Rose a key. If she had the strength, she would take her revenge. Tosun wondered if Sid was sure since Rose was nowhere to be found. Sid said the real battle would happen in 3 days, giving Rose time to process everything. Wedding day arrived with crowds, but not everyone was happy. Some wanted Rose out, calling her a traitor unfit to rule, and soldiers started shooting at anyone speaking against her, labeling them rebels. Parvase was nervous, but focused, reflecting on how he'd tricked Renee and turned her husband into a puppet, though he hadn't expected the king to risk his life to change the ring's ownership. Now, the ring belonged to Rose Rihanna, and to activate it, Parvase was told he had to marry Rose and take her blood. He opened the box to find the ring missing, panicked, and searched everywhere. Then he got a video call from Parv Asset, telling him to celebrate because everything was ready and that after the ceremony he'd get the 12th seat of the rounds, but warned him not to screw up. Parv tried to calm himself, knowing the ceremony was the priority. At the wedding, Rose showed up in her outfit, and everyone knew the marriage was just for show. Sid played piano, still searching for the missing ring. The priest asked Parvase if he agreed, and he said yes. When asked Rose, she refused. Parvase got angry and challenged her refusal, but Rose said she owned her mistakes, killing the king, betraying the kingdom, joining the shadows, but she wanted to fix things before it was too late. She accused Parvase of manipulating her father and defiling her mother. Parvase demanded proof, but Rose said she didn't need any. Sarcastically, Parvase asked if she was holding him hostage to marry him quietly. Rose said no, swearing on the ring Sid left her that she wouldn't give up on her true love. The ring glowed brightly as Rose put it on, activating a powerful light that spread through the kingdom. Then, a message from the king played everywhere, where he confessed that by the time people heard this, he'd be dead multiple times because his mind was deteriorating. He claimed he was being drugged, which explained his failing senses. He'd asked his wife to change his food, but it didn't help. The mastermind behind this was a group led by Duke Verset, trying to control the Varian kingdom. As the broadcast shook the capital, Parvase realized he was trapped and worried others would be too. They decided to blame Parvase for everything. The king said he trusted his daughter most and left the kingdom's future in her hands, naming Rose Rihanna as the new leader, hoping everyone would believe in her rule. Rose got emotional, tears streaming down her face as the broadcast ended, causing chaos. Parvase urged people not to trust the message, calling it lies, and his allies agreed, demanding the throne be handed to the rightful person, Rose. Parvase exploded in anger, accusing everyone of scheming and framing him. Then two people drew their swords, declaring that as princess, Rose bore the nation's responsibility and found Parvase guilty. Meanwhile, Renee was clueless about the turmoil and was told to leave immediately. Suddenly, Parvaset's neck was sliced by an unseen force. He was shocked because he hadn't attacked anyone yet. Then his head dropped near Renee, who panicked, only to be decapitated instantly by another powerful strike. Rose got scared and called for her mother just as Moded appeared, explaining that he'd hoped to use Parvaset longer, but his own allies were causing trouble. He introduced himself as Moded, a Knights Beyond Man, holding the 9th seat of the rounds. Moded congratulated Rose on her accession and said he could finally open the door. Activating a machine, he caused the ring in Rose's hand to glow again, explaining that the device's user and possessor could be different people, and that the device controlled everything. He used it to activate the ring, sending a powerful beam into the sky. Black clouds formed in the shape of a black rose, followed by lightning that destroyed the area. Rose was shocked, unable to believe what was happening. Moded explained that the black rose was a monster that had killed 100,000 monsters in one night, and that the cult's law was to kill all witnesses that night. Then, the Grand Ruler of the Fourth Realm, Ragnarok, arrived, a terrifying force who began attacking and destroying the town. Rose watched in fear as Moded ordered Ragnarok to crush everyone. Ragnarok attacked Rose, but suddenly a string sliced off one of his arms. Both Moded and Rose were shocked to see who had intervened. Shadow. Shadow commented that while rare things like a rose blooming in the sky, flames inside a bed, and a light racing toward Earth happen, this spectacle looked pretty ugly. News had spread like wildfire that the Black Rose had been activated in the Oriana Kingdom, and Alpha, hearing the report, simply noted with a calmness that the destruction had already begun. Meanwhile, Ragnarok had begun spawning smaller monsters, and Mordred arrived at the scene, openly impressed that Shadow had actually managed to injure a creature of that scale, as he questioned who exactly he was facing. Shadow, in his signature calm manner, introduced himself as a member of Shadow Garden, and at that moment, the elf sitting nearby stood, changed into her combat gear without hesitation, and firmly declared that they were Shadow Garden, the ones who lived in darkness and hunted those who hid there. Suddenly, Ragnarok regenerated completely and hurled the smaller monsters to the ground like discarded toys. But with Shadow's subtle signal, the members of Shadow Garden charged into the chaos, engaging with the precision of seasoned predators. Rose, watching this unfold, was left stunned, though Shadow turned to her and told her to leave because she had something far more important to accomplish. And although hesitant, she agreed and sprinted off while Shadow, smiling with that familiar mix of calm and menace, teleported in front of Ragnarok and unleashed a devastating punch that sent the beast flying, only for it to recover instantly and charge again. Elsewhere, Mordred, fully confident and smug, mocked his opponents, claiming they had underestimated his power, though his words were cut short when Beta, Zeta, and the others appeared, their sudden presence shifting the atmosphere entirely as they revealed that they knew who he really was, the Knight Beyond Man, 9th seat of the rounds. The women declared that even though they had never crossed paths with him before, they were there to kill him. But first, they wanted answers, and Mordred, clearly not used to being spoken to like this, struck with his invisible blade, warning them to know their place. They dodged effortlessly, and Epsilon coolly identified his move as the invisible sword strike, explaining the origin of his title, while Mordred smugly confirmed that his blade was so advanced it was imperceptible to mortal eyes, though he admitted he was impressed by their reflexes. Epsilon scoffed and revealed the truth that his sword was an ancient artifact, mocking him for parading stolen goods as skill, and she added that even his arm and cloak were artifacts, calling him pathetic for flaunting other people's hard work, before vowing they would take everything back. Infuriated, Mordred launched a ferocious assault, but Epsilon responded with a magical blade strike so overwhelming that it left him shocked, and Beta piled on by mocking his petty thefts, making it clear that their knowledge and power completely outclassed his tricks. She gave him one last warning to hand over information voluntarily, or they would take it by force, which only pushed Mordred further into rage as he dared them to try. While this battle escalated, Rose ran through the burning streets, horrified by the sight of monsters massacring civilians, And though she felt powerless, her despair was interrupted when Shadow Garden suddenly arrived and slaughtered the creatures with ruthless efficiency, which made her realize she had no choice but to trust them. Soon, Margaret arrived, and Rose requested her help to open the ancient cellar beneath the castle garden, explaining that the structure was strong enough to protect civilians, and she then declared her intention to rally the knights and lead them into the city to rescue survivors. Margaret stood silently for a moment, but her expression softened as she addressed Rose as Queen Rose, and though the words struck Rose deeply, she held back her emotions, nodded firmly, and set off with renewed determination. Back on the battlefield, Shadow dodged Ragnarok's relentless strikes, each one devastating the landscape below, and he casually remarked on its overwhelming magical power while acknowledging how formidable the creature truly was. He then extended his magic threads to restrain the beast, calmly declaring that he now controlled the skies. Suddenly, Mordred came crashing to the ground, bloodied and broken, and Rose froze at the sight of the once dominant man reduced to such a state, only to realize this was the handiwork of Beta and Epsilon, who arrived moments later with confidence radiating from them. Mordred staggered, admitting that he had underestimated their strength, and the girls mocked him again, pointing out that he was using stolen artifacts, which stripped him of the right to complain about an unfair fight. He sneered in defiance, declaring the fight was far from over because Ragnarok still lived and could kill them all in seconds. But Epsilon smirked, telling him they could wait, because first, he would answer their questions about the Black Rose, the magical beasts, and the cult. He began explaining that Ragnarok's existence was proof of countless other worlds beyond theirs, dimensions known as realms, all orbiting a mysterious central point no one truly understood, perhaps a god, and when these realms collided, they briefly connected, changing everything. He revealed that magic had never been native to their world, but had arrived only after such a collision, which brought a magical flow that altered their planet's biosphere, wiping out ancient dragons, creatures akin to dinosaurs, because they failed to adapt, while those that survived evolved into humans. He revealed that the Black Rose was actually an artificial gate to another world, a gate that the Oriana Kingdom had accidentally opened, causing over 1,000 enemy soldiers to die in one night, while unleashing chaos that allowed magical creatures to flood in and feast on humans. Mordred proudly claimed it had been the cult who closed the gate and saved the kingdom, and now Rose would pay the price for her bloodline, which carried immense magical power. He mocked her late father, saying that his refusal to hand her over to the cult as a child had cost him his life and destroyed the Oriana Kingdom. Rose, filled with fire, declared she would fulfill her father's wishes, but Mordred dismissed her as a puppet destined to follow his orders, promising that Ragnarok would kill her. Before his words could linger, Ragnarok's arm was severed and crashed to the ground, and Shadow appeared, effortlessly slicing the beast apart with his threads until its body lay in pieces. Mordred was left in shock, stammering at the impossibility of Shadow defeating the most powerful creature alive, but Alpha soon confirmed that all magical beasts in the region had been exterminated. Mordred's composure shattered, and he descended into hysterical laughter, insisting this was a nightmare, before merging himself with Ragnarok's body in desperation. Shadow, observing this transformation, smirked, casually admitting that the fight had been fun, almost like battling a boss in a video game, and when Mordred lunged, Shadow sighed, calling him defective. Despite Mordred's immense strength, Shadow overwhelmed him with ease, dragging him into the sky, dodging every blow, and declaring the fight over. He pummeled Mordred relentlessly, eventually taking their battle beyond the atmosphere, and Mordred screamed into the void, desperately searching for him. Shadow's calm voice echoed as he recited an ancient saying, thanking Mordred for reminding him of relics before announcing that playtime was over. When Mordred finally demanded to know who he was, Shadow introduced himself as Shadow, and in an instant, a colossal atomic explosion lit up the heavens, visible to all, and those who had ever crossed paths with Shadow immediately recognized his handiwork. The light faded to reveal him standing alone, and Beta and Epsilon watched with pride as he remarked that brute strength wasn't always a bad thing. A swirling black portal formed, and without hesitation, Shadow dipped a finger into it before stepping through, leaving everyone speechless as Rose's ring shattered in her hand. The scene shifted to Japan, now reduced to ruins. Akane Nishino awoke in a daze, staring at the moon and remarking that it reminded her of him as she wandered the devastated streets, carrying both a gun and her memories of Kid Kaganu. She reflected on how strange it was that she was 20 years old but still wearing her school uniform, and despite being warned of the creatures lurking at night, she refused to abandon her friends. Determined to gather information, even though the world had fallen apart, she remembered the boy she once thought was so ordinary, yet his memory lingered as clearly as the moon above. Her lonely walk was interrupted when she was ambushed, captured, and mocked by men working for a mysterious client. And as she fought to survive, she suddenly found herself saved once again when the ceiling shattered and Shadow descended, introducing himself with calm authority as the hunter of those who hid in the dark before unsheathing his blade while Nishino, stunned, whispered his name in awe.